people safe. Every year, this committee hears from our nation's top national security and law enforcement leaders to examine critical threats to our homeland security. Our nation recently marked the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks, and from the fearless first responders who bravely ran into danger to save others, to families who were torn apart, we'll never forget the sacrifice and the sorrow of that tragic day. We must also continue to support our selfless service members who have fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all around the world. It was out of the ashes of 9/11 that the Department of Homeland Security was created with one primary mission: keeping Americans safe from all threats. In the 20 years since those horrific attacks, the threats to our nation's safety have become increasingly complex and widespread. We must stay vigilant to the threat posed by foreign terrorism, and we must do more to address the growing and deadly threat posed by domestic terrorists. Our national security agencies have noted that domestic terrorism, driven by white supremacist and anti-government ideologies, pose the most lethal, violent threat to our nation's security. In recent years, we have seen the tragic and deadly consequences of this threat, including massacres at houses of worship and the shocking attack on the U.S. Capitol. We must do more to ensure that our counterterrorism resources are being used effectively to address this danger and prevent further violence. Our nation also continues to experience an increasing number of cyber attacks, which jeopardizes sensitive information and have the potential to disrupt our daily lives with just a few clicks of a button. From the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange hacks to the ransomware attacks on the Colonial Pipeline, every sector of our economy and every level of our government are at risk of cyber attacks from foreign adversaries or criminal organizations. Our financial networks, critical infrastructure, and vital institutions all remain vulnerable to these relentless attacks. And we must ensure that we're taking every possible measure to secure our networks, hold these attackers accountable, and deter future breaches. Finally, one of the most challenging threats to our homeland security does not come from a foreign nation or criminal group. It does not follow an ideology. Yet year after year, we see the destruction caused by severe storms, hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. These disasters, driven by worsening climate change, pose an existential threat to our nation and to the entire planet. The scale and severity of the security threats we are facing today can certainly be daunting, and given the increasing strains placed on the Department of Homeland Security, we must ensure that they have the resources and personnel to effectively carry out this critical mission. From securing our borders, including our southern border that is currently seeing an unprecedented number of migrants seeking safety and security in the United States, to responding to numerous natural disasters and taking the lead role in vetting and resettling Afghan refugees, DHS is playing a vital role in many of the most urgent issues facing our nation. DHS personnel, along with our FBI and other national security personnel, are on the front lines working to address these critical situations. And while many of us will never know the names of the thousands of personnel working tirelessly behind the scenes at your agencies to protect our country, we are all counting on you, and I appreciate each of our witnesses for taking the time to join us today. I look forward to a comprehensive and insightful discussion of how we can best safeguard our nation. And with that, turn over Ranking Member Portman for your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for convening this incredibly important annual hearing on threats to the homeland. And thanks to our distinguished witnesses for attending. We look forward to the opportunity to hear from you today. There's a lot to talk about. The theme of the hearing is 20 years after 9/11. So our focus today is the evolution of the threat landscape since the devastating attacks on that fateful day. In 2001, it was the Taliban who provided a safe haven for al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. a safe haven to launch a devastating attack on our homeland, killing nearly 3,000 people. The United States responded. As our nation became all too aware, we needed to take the fight to the terrorists overseas so that they could not bring their fight here ever again. We needed a new security architecture to keep us safe, which included the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. It also, by the way, was the recreation of this committee as the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. To a large degree, you have to say we've been successful. We've not had a mass casualty foreign terrorist attack on American soil during those intervening 20 years. I don't think any of us would have thought that was possible back on 9/11. The reason for that success is not because the terrorists have stopped trying. It is thanks to our armed forces, intelligence community, and law enforcement that we have succeeded in stopping those terrorists. This hearing is timely. A little more than 20 days ago, the last American troops withdrew hastily from Afghanistan, and the Taliban once again took back the government of Afghanistan. The new Taliban looks very much like the old Taliban, with terrorists on the United Nations Security Council's blacklist at its highest ranks. In fact, the leader of the Haqqani Network, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization which maintains close ties to al-Qaeda and cooperates with ISIS-K, was named the acting interior minister. This means the Taliban official in charge of combating terrorism is on the FBI's most wanted list. The CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, and Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, have already moved up the timeline of when terror groups operating in Afghanistan are likely to threaten the homeland, from, quote, possibly 2 years to within 1 to 2 years. The DEA noted that this is a conservative estimate. The CIA has already seen potential movement of al-Qaeda into Afghanistan. The catastrophic way the Biden administration withdrew from Afghanistan, surprising our NATO allies and abandoning our Afghan allies, has left us without eyes and ears on the ground. It has also signaled to the world that the United States is an unreliable partner. The rushed and unplanned nature of the evacuation also resulted in too many left behind, actually some American citizens and green card holders, and many Afghans who had stood by us as drivers, interpreters, or worked for NATO or worked for the United Nations. And because of the chaos at the Karzai airport, it appears that many who did get evacuated and admitted to the United States do not have a record of working with the U.S. government or our partners, and yet they are not being subject to normal security screening and vetting procedures. We have a moral responsibility to welcome the Afghan evacuees who have stood by us and who have had to flee their country because of the feckless actions of the Biden administration. I agree with that. We also, though, have a moral responsibility to do everything in our power to ensure the safety and security of American citizens and American communities by doing the proper vetting so we are not releasing terrorists or criminals into our ranks. I'm disappointed, as the administration knows, that despite my request since September 1st, the day after the withdrawal, members of this committee have yet to receive a classified briefing on vetting procedures, even as we are told that evacuees are being resettled in our states. We cannot do proper oversight without basic information. I realize there was a classified staff briefing yesterday, a few weeks after the request. I was told by the staff that they did not learn anything in addition to what was presented in a non-classified setting. So I repeat my request today that members of this committee be provided a classified briefing as soon as possible. These recent events have put the heightened foreign terrorist threat top of mind. In fact, the Director of National Intelligence has stated that, quote, terrorists remain interested in using chemical and biological agents in attacks against U.S. interests and possibly the U.S. homeland, end quote. The broader threat landscape, however, has evolved since 9/11. We face an elevated threat from domestic and homegrown violent extremists, including lone actors. We have experienced a slew of large-scale cyber attacks from both nation-states and criminals, and increasingly the line between the two is blurred. Cyber criminals in countries like Russia frequently operate with the tacit blessing of the government, where at a minimum officials turn a blind eye to ongoing crimes. I would say that China continues to create an issue for our homeland. By continuing to recruit U.S.-based scientists and researchers to transfer U.S. taxpayer-funded intellectual property for China's economic and military gain. And further, we cannot ignore the ongoing crisis at the southern border. This also affects our homeland. The Biden administration's decision to dismantle the previous administration's border policies with no consideration of the consequences and nothing in its place has resulted in an historic surge of unlawful migrants, unaccompanied children, and deadly narcotics like fentanyl coming into our country. And make no mistake, the Mexican cartels are benefiting from this and gaining strength on both sides of the border. The trafficking of dangerous drugs across our border has helped fuel an addiction epidemic that has hit communities in my home state of Ohio particularly hard, with overdose deaths increasing over the last year after we made so much progress in saving lives over the few years before the pandemic. We must redouble our efforts to stop these drugs from flooding our communities. As far as I'm concerned, demand reduction remains the key. But the higher volumes reduces the price of these drugs on the streets, expands the number of drugs available, and causes, therefore, more devastation. It is clear that the border is a public health and humanitarian crisis, and has been for months. But particularly now, just look at Del Rio, Texas, where more than 10,000 migrants, mostly Haitians, who have been living in Latin America, some for years, have been living in squalor under a bridge. This is not new, by the way. It's just a logical extension of what has been happening on the border since the Biden administration came to office and reversed the policies that were in place, again, without putting in place policies to deal with what was totally predictable, a surge. It is also a national security threat. More than 1 in 4 migrants encountered at the border last month were not from Mexico or the 3 Central American countries, sometimes called the Northern Triangle. 25% were not from any of those countries. Nearly all of them avoided going to a port of entry and instead were apprehended by Border Patrol agents. The Border Patrol has now made more than 1 million apprehensions of unlawful migrants at our southern border since President Biden was inaugurated, and they will tell you a lot of folks got away. So we have a lot to talk about today. We certainly have the right people here to talk about all these issues. And again, I appreciate your being here in person to provide answers to the tough questions I imagine you'll get from both sides of the aisle, given all of the crises we face that I mentioned. I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to a productive conversation about the threats we face and about the actions being taken to prevent them.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. It is the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony that you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Our first witness is Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the 7th Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Previously, he served as the Department's Deputy Secretary and as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and began his public service at the Department of Justice. Mr. Secretary, thank you for appearing before this committee today, and you are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the threat landscape facing our homeland 20 years after 9/11, alongside my colleagues from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Counterterrorism Center. During the past few weeks, I've attended numerous events to remember that tragic assault on our democracy. Each commemoration was a powerful reminder of why we serve, in memory of those whom we lost and in pursuit of our noble mission to protect the homeland. Today, we face a diverse and evolving threat landscape that includes domestic and international terrorism, malicious cyber activities, an ongoing global pandemic, transnational crime, climate change, and more. Through the extraordinary talent and dedication of the more than 250,000 individuals who comprise our department, we are meeting the challenge to protect our homeland and keep our communities safe. Every day, our department's personnel make tremendous sacrifices to achieve this mission. I would like to take a moment to describe the major threats facing our country today and the work we are doing to combat them. First, we have built a multi-layered security and screening and vetting architecture to combat the evolving terrorist threat. We remain ever vigilant to protecting the homeland from foreign terrorists seeking to do us harm, the very reason the Department's creation, while combating the most significant and persistent terrorism-related threat facing our country today, which stems from both homegrown and domestic violent extremists who are inspired by a broad range of ideological motivations. To meet this challenge, DHS has established a dedicated domestic terrorism branch within our Office of Intelligence and Analysis, launched the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships to provide communities with evidence-based tools and resources to address early risk factors, and redoubled our efforts to share timely and actionable information and intelligence with our partners across every level of government. This year, for the first time, we designated combating domestic violent extremism as a national priority area in FEMA grant programs, resulting in at least $77 million being spent on capabilities to detect and protect against these threats in communities nationwide. At the same time, we are working with our partners in the intelligence community to assess the security and counterterrorism threats that could develop over the coming months and years, including those potentially related to the fall of the government of Afghanistan and the risks associated with the more permissive environments being exploited to plot attacks against the United States. Second, we continue to combat counterintelligence and malign threats from nation-state adversaries. These adversaries include the People's Republic of China, or the PRC, which continues to engage in intellectual property theft, the exploitation of vulnerable supply chains, and use of economic coercion to threaten our economic security. During the pandemic, for example, DHS has targeted PRC-based manufacturers to prevent the PRC from exploiting COVID-19 to profit from the production of fraudulent PPE and medical supplies that especially endanger our country's frontline workers. DHS has also prevented goods produced by forced labor from entering our markets and continues to work closely with the Department of State to prevent the PRC's exploitation of our academic system. Third, as cyber threats have grown, so have our efforts to increase our nation's cybersecurity resilience and protect our critical infrastructure. Ransomware incidents are on the rise. Last year, victims paid an estimated $350 million in ransoms, a 311% increase over the prior year, with the average payment exceeding $300,000. In July, in partnership with the Department of Justice and other federal agencies, DHS launched StopRansomware.gov to help private and public organizations of all sizes combat ransomware and adopt cybersecurity best practices. Our experts at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, stood up the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative to bring together partners from every level of government and the private sector to reduce cyber risks. To better protect our critical infrastructure, TSA recently issued 2 new security directives after soliciting industry feedback to strengthen the cybersecurity and resilience of our nation's pipelines. CISA and our Office of Intelligence and Analysis are also working with all 50 states, local jurisdictions, and election technology experts to keep our elections secure. To further lead the way, we are building a top-tier cybersecurity workforce by investing in the development of diverse talent pipelines and building the expertise to keep addressing changing threats. We are also increasing and optimizing grant programs to improve cybersecurity capabilities across every level of government and in local communities. Fourth, we continue making risk-based investments to keep our borders secure, including from threats posed by transnational criminal organizations. We are collaborating with our international partners to disrupt these groups, combat their illicit activities like drug trafficking and human smuggling, and hold accountable those with ties to their logistical operations, while streamlining multinational cooperation on investigations and prosecutions. Fifth, DHS continues to support nationwide efforts to combat the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. FEMA has helped stand up more than 800 community vaccination centers, including almost 200 mobile sites to more equitably increase access to COVID-19 vaccines across vulnerable and rural populations. The Transportation Security Administration acted to protect the health of the traveling public and transportation personnel by implementing a federal mask mandate at airports, on commercial aircraft, and in various modes of surface transportation. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secret Service and Immigration and Customs Enforcement have partnered with other federal agencies to protect Americans from COVID-19 related fraud and criminal activity, including by preventing more than $3 billion worth of much-needed COVID-19 relief from fraudulently ending up in the pockets of criminals. Finally, we are countering the current and growing existential threat posed by climate change. Hurricane Ida was just the latest manifestation of a devastating reality. Natural disasters rising in intensity and destructive reach. However, this threat is not new, nor is it unique to any region. To help communities recover and remain resilient, President Biden doubled the size of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, pouring $1 billion into wildfire resilience efforts, flood control initiatives, and much more. DHS also authorized nearly $3.5 billion in hazard mitigation grant program funding to help states, tribes, and territories adapt and prepare for the impacts of the climate crisis. Further, FEMA revised its policies to overcome historic inequities in its aid programs and ensure a fairer and more equitable distribution of assistance to minority, low-income, and other disenfranchised communities. 2 decades after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security remains focused on protecting our country from evolving threats, both seen and unseen, and safeguarding our communities. We can execute this critical mission because of our incredible workforce and because of our key partners, the members of this committee, our counterparts abroad, the private sector, non-governmental organizations, and local communities. We will remain vigilant, resilient, and agile. We will do so to continue countering the threats of today and of the next 20 years. Thank you for your leadership and your continued support, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. Our next witness is Director Christopher Wray. Director Wray is the 8th Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Previously, Mr. Wray served as Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice. He also served on the President's Corporate Fraud Task Force and supervised the Enron Task Force, in addition to playing a key role in the national security objectives for the Department. Mr. Wray, or Director Wray, thank you for appearing before the committee here today, and you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to discuss the threats facing our homeland. A week and a half ago, we marked a somber, really sacred anniversary in this country, 20 years since the September 11th attacks. September 11th reminds us of evil and loss, the nearly 3,000 victims taken from us that day and their families. But 9/11 also reminds us of sacrifice and selflessness, of common purpose. It reminds us of the first responders and everyday heroes we lost that day, and all those who suffered illness as a result of their selfless work after the attacks, including members of our FBI family. And still, 2 decades later, our response to September 11th and the lessons learned from those attacks drive our approach to combating all the threats Americans face today. It was 9/11, after all, that turned the FBI into an agency focused on disrupting threats and taught us how to build deeper, more effective partnerships, both here at home and around the world. And good thing we made those changes, because as we'll discuss this morning, there's no shortage of dangers to defend against. Just a flavor before we even get to terrorism. On the cyber front, we're now investigating over 100 different types of ransomware, each with scores of victims. And that's on top of hundreds of other national security and criminal cyber threats we're working against every day. In our violent crime work, We recently arrested over 600 gang members in a single month. That's just 1 month. Protecting our nation's innovation. We're opening a new China counterintelligence investigation every 12 hours. And every day we receive thousands of tips into our National Threat Operations Center, many of which involve imminent threats to life requiring swift action. Now, the list goes on and on. I'm not going to have time to discuss most of them before we get started, but I do want to spend a few minutes on terrorism and the challenges facing those protecting against it. Preventing terrorist attacks remains our top priority, both now and for the foreseeable future. Today, the greatest terrorist threat we face here in the U.S. is from what are in effect lone actors. Because they act alone and move quickly from radicalization to action, often using easily obtainable weapons against soft targets, these attackers don't leave a lot of dots for investigators to connect, and not a lot of time in which to connect them. We continue to see individuals radicalized here at home by jihadist ideologies espoused by foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, what we would call homegrown violent extremists. But we're also countering lone domestic violent extremists, radicalized by personalized grievances, ranging from racial and ethnic bias to anti-government, anti-authority sentiment to conspiracy theories. There is no doubt about it, today's threat is different from what it was 20 years ago, and it'll almost certainly continue to change. And to stay in front of it, we've got to adapt too. And that's why over the last year and a half, the FBI has pushed even more resources to our domestic terrorism investigations. Since the spring of 2020, so the past 16, 18 months or so, we've more than doubled our domestic terrorism caseload from about 1,000 to around 2,700 investigations. And we've surged personnel to match, more than doubling the number of people working that threat from a year before. But we're also surging against threats by foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Shabaab. Their operatives continue to look for vulnerabilities and have not stopped trying to carry out large-scale attacks against us. And we are certainly watching the evolving situation in Afghanistan. Now, 9/11 was 20 years ago, but for us at the FBI, as I know it does for my colleagues here with me, it represents a danger we focus on every day. And make no mistake, the danger is real. Our adversaries are committed, and they're hoping to succeed just once, while we're working to bat 1,000. So we are working with our partners to identify and stop would-be attackers before they act. Just within the past couple of years, we've thwarted potential terrorist attacks in areas like Las Vegas, Tampa, New York, Cleveland, Kansas City, Miami, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. Now, we're proud of our successes, but we need to stay on the balls of our feet, relentlessly vigilant against the next plot by our adversaries and their next attempts to attack us. Our workforce has been battling the threat of terrorism and every other threat we face right through the teeth of a pandemic and rising danger to their own safety. And I say that because over the past year, we have seen a sharp and deeply disturbing uptick in violence against the law enforcement community. In just the first 8 months of this year, 52 law enforcement officers have been feloniously killed on the job. Just put that in context, that's an officer murdered in this country every 5 days, and already more than it was in all of 2020. And of course, that doesn't even count all those who've died in the line of duty facing the other inherent dangers of the job, much less the scores of agents, officers, analysts, and other dedicated professionals who died from COVID-19. And we will be forever indebted for their bravery and sacrifice and are bound and determined to honor them all through the way we approach our work. while we remain focused on our ultimate mission, protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. So thank you for taking the time to hear from me today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director Ray. Our next witness is Director Christine Abazade. Director Abazade is the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. With 14 years of national security experience, she is the 8th Senate-confirmed director and the first woman to lead the United States counterterrorism enterprise. Formerly, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia, and as Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Director Abazade, thank you for appearing before this committee. You're now recognized for your opening comments.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and the distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the global counterterrorism environment and to highlight the tireless work of the NCTC's professionals and the work they do to protect the homeland. As noted in my statement for the record, 20 years after 9/11, the United States faces a changed threat from foreign terrorist organizations. The threat today is less acute to the homeland, but it continues to become more ideologically diffuse and geographically diverse. Even as the United States has ended its longest war in Afghanistan and takes on a broader array of national security priorities, NCTC remains committed to our mission to deter and disrupt terrorist efforts to harm the United States, both at home and abroad. The United States continues to have success in degrading foreign terrorist operations, including their threat to the homeland, though these terrorists have proven adaptive over years of CT pressure. Turning first to the international counterterrorism landscape. The 26 August suicide bombing by ISIS Khorasan at the international airport in Kabul, which tragically killed 13 U.S. service members and scores of Afghans, illustrates that foreign terrorist groups continue to place a premium on attacks against the United States. ISIS-K in Iraq and Syria, in addition to maintaining a strategic interest in conducting attacks in the West, remains committed to its long-term goal of establishing an Islamic caliphate and is fomenting sectarian discord, eroding confidence in governments, and exploiting security gaps to create conditions favorable for seizing territory again after significant losses several years ago. For its part, al-Qaeda has changed significantly since 9/11. The group and its affiliates and allies have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to adapt to changing CT environments and geopolitical realities. Part of this adaptation has included shifting from its core leadership structure in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region to a more geographically dispersed network of affiliates and veteran leaders across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. And while years of CT pressure has degraded the al-Qaeda network, the group and its affiliates remain intent on using individuals with access to the United States to conduct attacks. This was most recently demonstrated by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and their probable approval of a 2019 attack in Pensacola, Florida, where a Saudi Air Force officer killed 3 and wounded 8 U.S. service members. Now, here in the United States, the primary threat in the homeland comes from individuals inspired to violence, either by foreign terrorist groups or other domestic grievances and ideologies. U.S.-based homegrown violent extremists, HVEs, who are largely inspired by al-Qaeda or ISIS, will likely continue to attempt attacks because their personal and ideological grievances, their attraction to foreign terrorist messaging, and their access to weapons and targets. HVEs, they mobilize without specific direction from foreign terrorists, and they act independently and often with few associates, which makes detection and disruption very difficult. Separately, one of the other most pressing threats to the homeland comes from domestic violent extremists, DVEs, and in particular, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and militia violent extremists, who often mobilize to violence independent from direction of a formal or centralized organization. Since 2015, the threat from these individuals has increased, and since 2018, we saw DVEs pose the most lethal terrorist threat inside the homeland. We assess that DVEs will continue to pose a heightened threat for years to come, in part because many of the factors that underpin their motivations are likely to endure. Social polarization, negative perceptions about immigration, conspiracy theories promoting violence, distrust of government institutions, and biases against minority groups will likely drive some DVEs to conduct attacks this year. We also remain vigilant against Iran and its agents and proxies, principally Lebanese Hezbollah, and their intent in retaliating in the United States for the January 2020 killing of former IRGC Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani. The threat from Iran also faces us overseas, and particularly in Iraq, where Iraqi Shia militant groups pose the most immediate threat to U.S. interests. These militants have conducted an increasing number of indirect fire and unmanned aerial systems attacks against U.S. facilities in the past several months, with the objective of expelling U.S. forces from the country. Now, looking ahead, we will continue to face a diverse range of threats that will play out against the backdrop of complex global trends, including ongoing effects of COVID-19 pandemic, great power competition, and the disruptive effects of a changing climate and rapidly evolving technology. More than 15 years after its establishment, the National Counterterrorism Center is uniquely positioned to lead in this environment, working alongside our partners across the intelligence community and, importantly, the FBI and DHS as we move into the next phase of our counterterrorism fight. We will continue to discover, analyze, and warn about ongoing and future threats as part of a broader set of foreign policy challenges that the United States will face in the 21st century. And we will continue to find innovative ways to synthesize, manage, and exploit our unique access to terrorism data from across a spectrum of sources to identify threats that might otherwise go unnoticed. We mark the 20th anniversary of 9/11, recognizing the remarkable CT successes of the last 2 decades, and with gratitude, deep gratitude, to the military, law enforcement, diplomatic, and intelligence professionals who made these successes possible. Working together, we have succeeded in preventing another major 9/11-style attack in the homeland. But we must not be complacent. NCTC and the larger intelligence community and homeland security infrastructure must continue to collaborate and maintain the ability to innovate in an era of rapid technological change and stay ahead of the next evolution of the terrorist threat. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Abazade, for your opening comments. Director Wray, this morning it was reported that the FBI held back the digital key necessary to unlock the computers of hundreds of businesses and organizations that were subjects of a Kaseya cyber attack for almost 3 weeks. I want to hear why the Bureau would do this. Sharing the key sooner certainly could have potentially avoided millions of dollars in recovery cost. And I understand we need to both support cyber attack victims and bring perpetrators to justice. I understand that dual task that you have, but certainly I think this committee would like to hear your explanation for the Bureau's actions in related to this key.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by saying that, as I'm sure you can appreciate, since we're talking about an ongoing investigation, I'm somewhat limited in what I can say here. But first, let me say that Kaseya, in particular, has been a great help to law enforcement and CISA, and they've joined in our response to the threat. And I will say there's no substitute, as you and I have discussed previously, for a private sector partnership in this space to stop the avalanche of ransomware attacks that we continue to see. We are constantly using technical information that we obtain through our investigations and pushing it out to enable effective defense. And we don't wait for our investigation to be done to do it. But when it comes to the issue of encryption keys or decryption keys, there is a lot of testing and validating that is required to make sure that they're going to actually do what they're supposed to do. And there's a lot of engineering that's required to develop a tool that required to put put the tool to use. Sometimes we have to make calculations about how best to help the most people, because maximizing impact is always the goal. And whenever we do that in these joint enabled sequenced operations, we are doing it in conjunction with other government agencies, CISA and others. We make the decisions as a group, not unilaterally. And these are complex, case-specific decisions designed to create maximum impact, and that takes time in going against adversaries where we have to marshal resources not just around the country but all over the world.
Director Ray, you mentioned there were other federal agencies that were consulted. What other federal agencies were consulted in making this decision?
Well, again, I want to be careful here in not talking about a specific ongoing investigation, other than to say that when we are working in, as a general matter, in joint sequenced operations designed to maximize impact against an adversary, we, of course, work closely with our usual partners, prominent among them is CISA, but also members of the intelligence community and other agencies as well. And then it depends on the industry whether there might be other agencies involved.
And I just want to characterize your comments in explaining your actions. Are you saying that the key was not ready for the last 3 weeks, as was reported?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I certainly understand why the keen interest in the topic, and I'm trying to be as responsive as I can be while trying to be sensitive to an ongoing investigation. So I'm doing my best to try to be responsive and informative while also being careful not to, as Department of Justice policy prohibits me from, discussing an ongoing specific investigation.
Well, I understand that, Director Ray, but I believe this committee certainly deserves and needs a full accounting of FBI cyber activities, including classified activities. And I would hope today you could commit to me and to this committee that you would provide us with a complete briefing on this operation, but also the broader FBI cybersecurity operations and plans. Would you please commit to the committee that you would be willing to do that?
Happy to work with the committee to see what more information we can provide to be helpful and responsive, and I certainly agree that some of that might be better done in a classified setting, and so I'll have my staff follow up with yours to see what we can do to be more illuminating, recognizing again that some of this has to do with a very sensitive, ongoing, very much ongoing investigation.
I'd appreciate that. Secretary Mayorkas, on numerous occasions during this administration, as well as the last administration, I've asked for additional transparency regarding the ongoing border restrictions between the United States and Canada. I will tell you that my constituents are deeply frustrated by this, particularly given the trade and the relationships that people have across border. With the two of the busiest border crossings in North America are in Michigan, between Michigan and Canada. And those restrictions remain in place for Canadians to come across who have been fully vaccinated to enter the United States at land ports of entry. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, will you commit to provide my office and the public with the specific criteria the administration is using to justify ongoing restrictions for fully vaccinated Canadians at land ports of entry?
Mr. Chairman, I most certainly will. I know that you have expressed your concerns directly to me on a number of occasions, and I can assure you that we are reviewing our exercise of the Title 19 authorities to restrict travel through the ports of entry in light of the pandemic. We are very mindful of the economic consequences, and not only the economic consequences, but the consequences on family members who haven't seen one another for quite some time. And so I do make that commitment to you.
Could you tell us some of the criteria now?
So we are looking primarily, Mr. Chairman, at the public health rationale, the fact that the arc of the Delta variant is not yet where we need it to be. However, the President did make an important announcement yesterday to provide relief to the 212F international travel restrictions in early November to vaccinated individuals. That is a first step in our ongoing review of the travel restrictions born of the pandemic and its current situation here domestically.
So why those but not Canadians?
So we are taking it iteratively. We are looking at the situation not only at the ports of entry on our northern border, but also on our southern border. We have heard similar concerns with respect to border communities on the south and the impact, economic and family impact of the restrictions. We are looking at what we can do operationally, and we are moving in a very sequential and controlled manner. And I'd be happy to provide more information with you to you after this hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Secretary, and we will want that information provided as quickly as possible, and we'll look forward to meeting with your folks on it. I need to step aside for an Armed Services Committee meeting. Many of us know what it's like to be double booked. I will pass the gavel to to Senator Hassan, who will take the gavel. But before I leave, recognize Ranking Member Portman for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've discussed a broad array of threats already this morning, and I agree with the Chairman on the necessity for us to have the information on the cyber front, which is, of course, something that continues to grow every year in terms of a threat to our homeland. We talked about domestic extremists. Certainly that is a threat, as we've said today. I want to focus on the enhanced threat that just occurred in the past month, and that is, again, the way we left Afghanistan in a chaotic, rushed way, and what we've created in the meantime. Director Abazade, you said in your testimony this morning, the U.S. has ended its longest war. And I suppose that's true. But in a way, we haven't, have we? I mean, the war was about terrorism and keeping Afghanistan from being a platform for terrorist attacks against the United States. What we lost a month ago was eyes and ears on the ground and the ability to do just that. We had 2,500 troops there. Prior to the evacuation, we hadn't had a single casualty, thank God, in 18 months. We had 7,500 NATO troops with us, and we had the ability to do what we do not have now. The best example of that might be what happened tragically with the drone attack, the so-called over-the-horizon alternative that the Biden administration keeps talking about failed miserably, didn't it? And again, not having those eyes and ears on the ground makes it harder for us to protect the homeland. So I guess in a way we ended the longest war, but in another way we've made things more dangerous. Let me ask you about that. You talked about the ISIS-K suicide bombing as an example of a threat. Well, that happened during the evacuation. Again, we hadn't had, thank God, a casualty in 18 months until we lost those 13 brave soldiers, sailors, Marines. You also said in your testimony that the terrorists around the world are, quote, using individuals who have access to the U.S. to conduct attacks. I look at what's going on with the evacuation and us not knowing who's coming to this country, and that's a statement of fact. We just don't know. Having tried my darndest to find out from the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, it's happening so quickly and was so chaotic, we just don't know. So I'd ask you, Director Abazade, is our homeland more or less safe following from attack following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. With respect to Afghanistan, as I mentioned, the terrorist groups that we're most concerned about presenting a threat both in the region but also a future external threat is obviously one, ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, and two, Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda's affiliate there. Now, over the years and sustained CT pressure on both groups, principally Al-Qaeda, but given ISIS-K's more recent arrival on the scene, also significant counterterrorism pressure there, has really relegated those two groups to primarily a regional threat. Now, in the wake of our withdrawal, the question is, at what point does that regional threat build to a capability and intent that is focused externally and particularly focused on the homeland? And I would say from an intelligence community perspective, that's one of our highest priorities, which is to monitor and assess the degree to which those groups actually present an external threat.
Well, you've done some monitoring and assessment of it already. I mentioned the Defense Intelligence Agency and CIA have adjusted their projections as to the threat to the homeland, and particularly, Al-Qaeda moving back into Afghanistan. So would you say, again, is our homeland safe or less safe?
So the CIA and DIA assessments that I'm aware of are within the range that we had assessed prior to the drawdown, 1 to 3 years. I think it's fair to say that
well,
we are concerned
they're saying
about,
it's less time now, and they're saying that's a conservative estimate.
I think it is fair to assess that it is that the development of those groups' external operations capability, we've got to monitor and assess whether that's going to happen faster than we had predicted otherwise. Afghanistan's a very dynamic environment right now.
I'll take that as a yes, that we're less safe following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Director Ray, do you have any comments on that? Do you think we're more or less safe following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Well, I think I would share most of Director Abazade's summary, and of course you've cited some of the information you've gotten from our intelligence community partners. Obviously, we are concerned about what the future holds, whether it's the possibility of another safe haven, whether it's the possibility of ISIS-K being able to operate more freely in a less secure environment, whether it's the possibility of events in Afghanistan serving as some kind of catalyst or inspiration for terrorist attacks elsewhere in the region, or potentially with homegrown violent extremists.
Does it concern you that the Haqqani network leader, whose name is Haqqani, is now the acting Secretary of the Interior of Afghanistan?
Certainly concerns me.
He's on your most wanted list, isn't he?
I believe so.
Well, look, the question is, what do we do now? And I hope that we have an enhanced response to the enhanced threat, and not just the kind of feckless drone strike that we saw and tragic drone strike that we saw. With regard to the evacuees, Mr. Secretary, we haven't had a chance to talk yet. I know you tried to reach me, and I appreciate that. And I do think that we've got a real problem here. I mean, the best numbers we have are that very few of the people who have come over are so-called SIVs, meaning the people who actually helped us, who were drivers or interpreters or otherwise assisted the U.S. effort. Secretary Blinken, in his testimony last week, said there are about 20,000 people who had applied for SIV. 708 of them have come through the evacuation, as far as we know. Those are the best numbers we have. In fact, when you look at who's come, not only did we leave American citizens behind, and obviously leave a lot of these SIVs behind who, stood by us, but it looks like there are about 6,500 American citizens who came. That's about 11%. About 3,500 lawful permanent residents. That's just under 6%. There are about 3,000 people with visas, including these SIVs. That's about 5.5%. And the rest, around 75% of the people who came, are called parolees, meaning they don't fit in any of those categories. And we're pushing very hard to get the information. Again, we're desperate to have a classified briefing to be able to get into that, because apparently you can't provide it in an open setting, or maybe just don't have the information. But does that concern you, that 3/4 of the people who we have brought into this country, and by the way, we brought about half the people into America, about 60,000, about 120,000 are still overseas, and we're told that among those people overseas there are even fewer American citizens or permanent green card holders or SIVs. But does it concern you that we don't have in place a way to properly vet and handle these individuals, including allowing these individuals, to walk off the military bases if they choose to do so today?
Ranking Member Portman, first of all, as a preliminary matter, I was disappointed to learn of your disappointment with respect to the information that you've received, even in the classified context, and I will...
We haven't had a classified briefing yet.
Well, yesterday, I understand the staff did, and I will...
The staff had one, and their report to me, at least, was that they didn't receive anything new that they hadn't already received, including in our phone call yesterday, which was not classified. So the point is, we would just love to get whatever you all need to do to give us the information. We just don't have the information.
And precisely why I wanted to articulate my apology and make sure that we remedy that situation right away.
Thank you.
You're entitled to that information.
Thank you.
So we do have a robust screening and vetting process, in addition to expertise both in the transit countries and here domestically to ensure the safety and security of the American people. Let me say, with respect to the population of individuals who are not American citizens, lawful permanent residents, or special immigrant visa holders, we also have in that remaining population individuals who applied for special immigrant visas, but whose applications had not yet been completed at the time of the evacuation. We have individuals who have been employed locally in Afghanistan by the United States, who've assisted us in Afghanistan. We have other individuals who qualify for special immigrant visa status, individuals who qualify for P1 or P2 classification of refugees. So it's a very mixed population, and we screen and vet that remaining group as we screen and vet all.
Thank you.
We'll chance to get into this more later, but there's some discrepancy there. But we'll look forward to talking more.
Senator, I'll note that there is going to be a second round of questions, and we've gone well over here. So I'm going to turn to Senator Carper now.
Thanks very much. I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. I remember full well our withdrawal from Vietnam. I remember watching on television as American helicopters rose from the ground in Saigon, and attached to them all over those helicopters were Vietnamese people trying to get out of that country. I remember watching those helicopters rise into the sky and people fall off of those helicopters to their death. And as I watched our withdrawal and the effort to try to get 125,000 people out of Afghanistan a month or so ago, I was reminded of what happened in Vietnam, I think in 1974. I think from the time that Donald Trump, and I'm not a real political guy, as my colleagues know, I think from the moment he sat down with the Taliban and began a negotiation, cut our two presidents to 2,500 people, I think the die was well cast. I think the pitch was pretty well telegraphed. And I said to myself, this may not end well. And it didn't. And I think the question for us now is, what do we do now? What do we do now? We're out of Afghanistan. We're trying to make sure that about 125,000 other people who are Afghans who helped us, that they have a chance to get out of there and to be resettled here. And I think our challenge is how do we handle the resettlement? How do we handle that? And that is, Mr. Secretary, that is a big part of your job, helped by Delaware and Jack Markell, former governor, to make it go well. And I think one of the questions for me today is, what do we need to be doing, not just in this committee, not just in the Senate, but what do we need to be doing as a body writ large to help make sure that the folks that are coming here have a new chance in their lives, have a chance to get settled? A lot of them want to work. We have a lot of employers that are looking for workers, and maybe at the end of the day that something good, hopefully, can come to something very tragic. I stood on the tarmac with the president, our military leadership, my congressional delegation, about a month ago as we received the sacred remains of 12 of our heroes, Navy, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army. And it was a sad and hard day. What do we do now going forward? There's a lot to do. We need to work together to make sure that we learn from what's happened in the past, learn what's happened in the last 20-some years, and go forward. And with that having been said, I want to ask my first question, if I could, to Mr. Wray, Director Wray. In 2020, the FBI arrested 180 individuals on domestic terrorism-related matters. Of these arrests, 75 were identified as white supremacist extremists. For years now, we've been hearing about the rising threat of racially motivated attacks, specifically attacks carried out by white supremacists. And you may have heard me say before that in order to address the problem, we must understand and address the root causes of that problem. Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas, why have we seen such a rise in racially and ethnically motivated extremism and violence in this country in recent years, and what is the root cause and how are we tackling it? Mr. Secretary.
Senator Carper, let me, if I may, take a moment to answer a point you made or respond to a point you made. There's important legislation that is pending that would bestow upon individuals evacuated from Afghanistan the same benefits that refugees receive, and that would assist in their resettlement here in the United States and their integration into our communities. And we're extraordinarily proud and inspired by the unity that we see across the country. We have seen, regrettably, over the last several years, Senator, a rise in the manifestation of hate. We've seen the propagation of false narratives. We've seen an increase in anti-government sentiments, and we are very watchful of and vigilant in response to any signs of connectivity between those ideologies and acts of violence. That is where our focus is.
All right, thank you. Director Wray, please, same question. Root cause, what is it? What are we doing about it?
So I think our focus is, of course, on the violence, not on the ideology itself. I would say that one of the things that we've done about now 2 years ago is create a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell, which was designed to bring together both our domestic terrorism experts as well as our hate crimes experts and try to get ahead of the threat and be more proactive in going against the threat. And we're very proud, for example, of the work of that fusion cell in preventing an attempted attack on a synagogue outside of Las Vegas, for example. I will say that a big part of the threat that you're asking about is the social media dimension. You know, some of these same people before might have been stewing away in, the basement or the attic, one part of the country, and not communicating with the other. But today, terrorism moves at the speed of social media, and you have the ability of lone actors disgruntled in one part of the country to spin up similar like-minded individuals in other parts of the country and urge them into action or inspire them into action. I think that is a huge part of the threat that you're asking about.
All right. Thank you. Another question, if I could, with respect to Afghanistan and counterterrorism. This would be for all three witnesses, and I'd like to start, if I could, with Director Abazade, please. Question: as we grapple with the fall of the government of Afghanistan, our focus remains on how to get Americans and our at-risk allies to safety. However, as we know, and as I believe you've mentioned in your testimony, ma'am, terrorist organizations thrive when they can exploit instability and weak government institutions. And that said, it's important that we look ahead to our ever-changing landscape in that region following the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. To that end, I'd like to ask each of you to take a moment to address the following. How has our threat landscape changed since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan just 3 weeks ago? And how are your agencies working to address the shifting threat landscape that will undoubtedly continue to evolve? Follow-up. I have a follow-up, but let me just, that's the one I'd like for you to tackle, please, if you would.
I'd ask each of you to try to be relatively brief. There will be a second round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The threat from Afghanistan, I think, is the top of our priority in terms of understanding what that dynamic landscape is likely to produce in terms of an external threat. We do think that principally the operating groups, ISIS-K and al-Qaeda, present a significant threat in the region. They are going to have to contend with the new de facto government in Afghanistan, the Taliban, principally ISIS-K. And this will be an absolute top priority as we develop our intelligence capabilities, our over-the-horizon capabilities, to make sure that we're monitoring any changes in the threat landscape and able to arm policymakers to address that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'm just going to ask that there are other two witnesses respond for the record to that same question. Thanks very much. And it's good to see you all. Thank you very much for being here, for your service, and for your leadership of the men and women with whom you serve. Thank you.
And I'll note, in addition to the response for the record, I'm sure others will be asking you a similar question, and you can elaborate on Senator Carper's question. Then Senator Johnson.
Secretary Mayorkas, I'm putting a chart that I've been keeping on apprehension southwest border. Just to give you some quick numbers here. To date, this calendar year, there have been almost 1.3 million apprehensions. We are averaging, the last 2 months, 6,700 to 6,800 people per day. That's a large caravan per day being apprehended by Border Patrol. 8 to 1,100 known gotaways, which would equate somewhere over 300,000 gotaways, known gotaways for the year. If you annualize these figures, been a couple 100,000 people per month. We'll be up to about 2.1 million apprehensions. Add the getaways, 300,000 to 400,000. We're up to 2.5 million people. You have repeatedly stated that our borders are not open, that they're closed. Do you honestly believe that our borders are closed?
Senator, I do. And let me speak to that. We have
let me ask you a couple questions here. This committee received, it was dated September 11th, but apparently this letter was not received till Thursday. I didn't find out about it till yesterday. I released it to the public immediately. By recently retired U.S. Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott. In this letter, former Chief Scott states, he is sickened by the avoidable and rapid disintegration of what was arguably the most effective border security in our nation's history. And of course, the chart shows it. We'd pretty well secured the border. We'd stopped the flow of unaccompanied children. We'd stopped the flow of family units because of the migrant protection protocols, the agreements that President Trump put in place, the building of the wall. We were serious about border security until your administration took office. You stood before this committee and said that you would enforce the laws. You have not done that. Let me go on. Chief Scott says, to think that well-resourced terrorist networks, criminal organizations, and hostile nations are not going to do the same, in other words, exploit the open border, is naive. Here's what's very troubling. He said the Secretary and other political appointees within DHS have provided factually incorrect information to congressional representatives and to the American public. So let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, of the 1.3 million people that we've apprehended, how many people have been returned, how many people are being detained, and how many people have been dispersed? And I want some numbers here. So again, 1.3 million people. How many people have been returned? How many people are being detained? How many people have been dispersed to all points around America?
Senator, I would be pleased to provide you with that data.
I want them now. Why don't you have that information now?
Senator, I do not have that data.
Why not?
For me.
Why don't you have that basic information?
Senator, I want to be accurate in the information.
I'm looking for ballpark figures. Is it about half? Have we dispersed about half of that? Are we up to about 600,000 people we dispersed?
Senator, these are the tools that we employ. We use the Title 42 authority, that is the public health authority, empowered by the Centers for Disease Control to expel individuals in light of the
So I'm hearing that you're not using that to the full extent and that we've got 50% of people, even apprehended under Title 42, that are not being returned. Is that accurate?
That is actually inaccurate.
Okay, so what is the, okay, so if you're saying that's
Senator,
inaccurate,
would you care to let the
figure?
witness finish an answer?
I actually want answers to my questions. What is the real figure then?
If I may say, Senator, we use the Title 42 authority, the public health authority of the Centers for Disease Control to the fullest extent we are able to.
So what is the percent that you are returning under Title 42? It's about 750,000 people apprehended under Title 42. How many of those individuals have been returned under Title 42?
Senator, I will provide that data to you.
So you're saying that 40 to 50% is not accurate. If you know that that's not accurate, you must have the real number.
Senator, what I said was not accurate was your assertion that we are not using Title 42 authority to the fullest extent that we can.
No, that's not what I said at all. I said we're not returning everybody under Title 42. We're dispersing a number of those individuals.
Senator, we are not doing that, not for reasons of our limitation of use that we impose on ourselves, but rather because certain of our capacity to return people under Title 42 is constrained by the Mexican authorities' ability to receive them. This is a matter of bilateral and multilateral relationships. We exercise the Title 42 authority to the fullest extent that we can. We then work with Mexico to assess what its capacity to receive individuals is.
Okay, again, you're talking about the process. I want numbers. I'm going to expect numbers. By the way, in our last hearing, which you didn't stick around for a second round of questions, you didn't come in here in person, I sent you questions for the record. I've got no response whatsoever. And you came before this committee, and you committed to responding to congressional oversight, and you have not done so. And according to former Chief Scott, you've provided factually incorrect information to Congress. So we're expecting you to up your game as it relates to congressional oversight. Let me quick switch to Afghanistan. We had a briefing yesterday morning, telephone briefing, and one of the assertions is that of the 124,000 Afghans that were evacuated out of Afghanistan, the majority, I can't remember, like the vast majority or almost all, worked for some government agency, the military, whatever. I asked the question, how do you know that? I didn't get an answer. I've also talked to the commanding general and the people on the ground in Fort McCoy that have about 13,000 of these Afghans in their custody right now in Toma, Wisconsin, or Sparta, Wisconsin. I continue to ask. I understand the screening. They were screening against the terrorist watch list and the no-fly list, that type of thing. So I understand how if, for example, an ISIS fighter or al-Qaeda terrorist, if they just happen to be on one of those watch lists, if we have a match, we're going to keep them out of the country. What are we doing to positively identify people, to connect them to these agencies or the members of the military that they did have connection with so that we have positive ID before we disperse? Because let's face it, 124,000 people, we got 700,000 SIVs, we got about 6,000 U.S. citizens. That leaves 117,000 people. We don't know who they are. How do we know who they are positively? Not just in terms of derogatory information.
So not only do we vet individuals against our intelligence databases, but we also vet them against the Department of Defense databases. We capture their biographic and biometric information in the transit countries before they are allowed to board flights to the United States. We have expert screeners and vetters whom we have deployed to those transit countries so that they can use their expertise in addition to the information that we have captured biometrically and biographically before they board the flights.
Many don't even have IDs.
The senator's time has expired. I'll now recognize myself for my round of questions. I just want to thank the ranking member as well as Chair Peters for this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses today, not only for being here, but for your service to our country. And I hope you will thank all the women and men you work with for their service as well. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to start where Senator Peters left off on the issue of the current status of the northern border. As you know, I asked you about this in July. You and your staff were part of a Zoom meeting that we had with business leaders in New Hampshire, as well as representatives of the Canadian Consul General's office in August. And I just have to say, I was very disappointed with the administration's decision yesterday about the Canadian border. Right now, I just want to be clear, non-vaccinated Canadians who have a negative COVID test can get on a plane and fly to the United States, but vaccinated Canadians, and they have a higher vaccination rate than we do, cannot cross a port of entry into our country. One of the things that came up in August in our meeting was the department's obligation to assess the economic impact of border closures on the domestic economy. For states like mine, where tourism is the second largest sector, I want to understand whether you have provided that analysis to the White House. You said in our meeting that ultimately this is a White House task force decision, because I do not understand the public health rationale here at all for closing the northern border to vehicular traffic when it is essentially open to air traffic.
Senator, I know of your disappointment. You have expressed it quite clearly to me. I should say that the decision is an all-of-government decision. The relevant equity holders are involved in the decision-making. We are very mindful of the economic impact. We are reviewing both the public health and the family impact consequences of our decision on a daily basis. And we are proceeding iteratively in light of, quite frankly, the arc of the Delta.
And I understand that, and I'm going to turn to some other questions now. But this is the same response we have gotten for weeks and months without anybody explaining to us the public health rationale for a decision that is keeping Canadians and Americans from seeing each other, businesses from doing their business with each other, tourists from coming to states like mine. Nothing like being at NASCAR in mid-July in Loudon, New Hampshire, our biggest single event of the year, and realizing that our stands were partly empty because the Canadians who usually visit and enjoy the Magic Mile couldn't come, even though they had a high vaccination rate and the public health threat was not explained at all, and especially in light of the fact that we were allowing Canadians to fly in, just not drive in. So I'll look forward to getting some more detailed response from the administration. Now, I want to turn to both Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray about the issue of al-Qaeda. Some assessments indicate that al-Qaeda could reconstitute itself and be capable of threatening the U.S. homeland in the next 1 to 2 years. So what are the FBI and DHS each doing to detect, investigate, and disrupt possible al-Qaeda attacks on the homeland amid assessments of their resurgence? We'll start with you, Director Wray.
Well, I appreciate the question. Certainly, as we get to the 20th anniversary here now, it's worth remembering that al-Qaeda has not stopped trying to hit us. For us, if there's good news, the good news is that we're in a fundamentally different posture here in terms of the FBI's stance than we were at the time of 9/11. And that starts with our over 200 joint terrorism task forces, which encompass something like 4,500 different federal, state, and local partners. So we are aggressively using those task forces all over the country to engage with sources, follow up with ties between subjects that we have under investigation with individuals overseas, working with our foreign partners to put information together. We're putting a heavy focus on community outreach as the evacuees settle here in the United States, to both try to get in front of any radicalization that could occur while they're here, but also to try to open up the lines of communication to make sure that if somebody sees something about someone in those communities, that they'll say something to us about it.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas.
Senator, we continue to screen and vet individuals seeking to arrive in the United States by any means, sea, land, and air. We have not relaxed our vigilance over the years. We speak very frequently about a rise in prominence of certain types of threats, the domestic violent extremist, the homegrown violent extremist. That does not mean that that rise in prominence suggests that we have taken our focus off the prior iteration. That is ever present.
Thank you. Another question for you both. Terrorists and criminals are using cryptocurrency to facilitate their activities. Foreign terrorist organizations have used cryptocurrency to directly solicit donations to their organizations and to launder money through the cover of charities to further their goals. Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas, are the FBI and DHS tracking the use of cryptocurrencies for the financing of terrorism and other homeland security threats? What are you doing to combat the use of cryptocurrencies for terrorist financing? Director?
So certainly we are seeing, you're exactly right, cryptocurrency now being used across a wide range of threats, both the ones you mentioned and others. We're seeing it on everything from buying criminal tools like botnets to laundering proceeds, evading sanctions, as you say, raising money for terrorist operations, darknet marketplaces. We are, and of course all of it boils down to making it harder and harder for us to follow and then ideally seize the money. Some of the things that we're doing are we've created a virtual currency evolving threat team at headquarters that has our subject matter experts designed to help with training and investigations in all of our field offices. We have a virtual currency response team to assist with that. We are engaged with academia and the expert community looking at new tools, technical tools and techniques. But it is becoming, I think, a phenomenon that permeates pretty much every program we have, and I don't expect that to change. In fact, if anything, I expect it to increase.
Thank you. And just briefly, Secretary Mayorkas.
The Director and I have spoken about this very issue a number of times. Senator. It is a concern of ours, an increasing concern. We in the Department of Homeland Security, our United States Secret Service, conducts investigations alongside with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And just a few weeks ago, I met with CEOs of major financial institutions to see what more we can do to address this challenge.
Thank you very much. Senator Langford.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Secretary Mayorkas, let me run through some quick numbers of things that are just requests that we have outstanding, trying to be able to get additional information. None of this should be difficult, but we're just trying to figure out and get our hands around what's happening with the refugees and parolees that are coming from Afghanistan. So just some quick things that we want to be able to follow up on. I'm not expecting you to answer right now, but we do need to follow up on it. We understand from the administration over 100,000 people have been evacuated from Afghanistan. We've heard a second number that 37,500 are actually coming into the United States and going through process. We don't know the remaining, where they're going, who they are they coming here or not? We don't know the breakdown of refugees and parolees. We don't know the breakdown of SIVs, the special immigrant visas, and what are called partial SIV immigrant visas, or folks that were American citizens and green card holders. There's some very basic pieces of information that we keep trying to be able to get. We cannot get at this point. We're also trying to get information about, for individuals that come into the United States, that go through the vetting process, that fail the vetting process, what will happen to them, or for individuals that come in as parolees but then commit criminal acts, what will happen to those individuals? We already have reports of some of the locations where some Afghan parolees are being held, that there's been some sexual assaults that have happened in those locations, and we're trying to get more information about that and to find out what happens to those individuals and where things go. None of those should be unrealistic questions. Those all should be data points that should be coming to you, and want to know if we can get those and how quickly we can get those.
May I share some of that data with you?
Yes.
Senator, so over 60,000 individuals have been brought to the United States after screening and vetting. There are approximately 12,000 Afghan evacuees located in the transit third countries.
Mr. Secretary, your microphone, I think, is off.
I apologize. Of the over 60,000 individuals who've been brought into the United States, and I will give you approximate figures and I will verify them, approximately 7% have been United States citizens, approximately 6% have been lawful permanent residents, approximately 3% have been individuals who are in receipt of their special immigrant visas. The balance of that population are individuals whose applications have not yet been processed for approval, who may qualify as SIVs and have not yet applied, who qualify or would qualify, I should say, as P1 or P2 refugees, who have been employed by the United States government in Afghanistan and are otherwise vulnerable Afghan nationals, such as journalists, human rights advocates, etc.
Right, but those individuals, we just need to know how their vetting process is going. This goes back to Senator Johnson's question earlier. How are we getting a positive idea on who this person is, not just say they're not on the terrorist watch list, so they must be okay. Do we really know this is a journalist? Do we really know what's the connection point on it? There's also a very odd request that came in. By the way, thank you for the data on that. We'll follow up on the rest. There's an odd request that came from OMB. OMB asked Congress to include in the CR that's coming up next week, asked Congress to waive all grounds of inadmissibility for Afghan parolees. I have to tell you, I was a little astounded when I saw that, to say they'd like to include that in there, because the grounds for inadmissibility for Afghan parolees are things like terrorism, association with terrorist organizations, money laundering, human trafficking, drug trafficking, polygamy, prostitution, persecutor of religious or individuals based on religious or political opinion, those who have commissioned torture or extrajudicial killings. I was a little astounded that OMB asked, would you waive all these grounds and allow us to be able to move people regardless of these? Where did that request come from?
So there must be a miscommunication, because we actually deny entry. We deny admission to individuals in many of those categories.
Right, and should.
So I will have to drill down on that.
This was the request that came from OMB to start after a request to be able to put it into the continuing resolution so future parolees would not be denied based on these things. And I have to tell you, I'm a little bit confused by that, and I would tell you I would adamantly oppose withdrawing any of those, and I would assume you would as well.
And there must be some miscommunication there, Senator, and I'll look into that immediately.
Okay, well, let's follow up on that to be able to make sure that that stays clear, that Congress is not going to give up that restriction for any of those individuals that are coming into the country. You and I have spoken before, shifting subjects on our southwest border, about MPP, that the federal courts have stepped back in and said to you, you have to reinstate the Trump policy for the migrant protection protocols and to be able to put those back in place. You told me you were going to deliver to me a timeline and the process of where that was going to go, how you were going to follow the federal courts to be able to reinstate that policy. I have not received that document yet. Where is that document and that timeline?
Senator, I owe you that timeline. The difficulty is, of course, that a predicate to the implementation of MPP, as we are required to do pursuant to court order, is our ongoing negotiations with Mexico. I do owe that to you.
Be great. I'd like to be able to see that timeline to be able to know what status we have in that. Last summer, you also told me that you were going to get to me by mid-August during our budget hearing. You were going to get to me by mid-August the ICE enforcement guideline update. That's been a preliminary document that's been sitting out there for a while that you and I have both spoken about. I don't have that final document yet. You had told me before it'd be done by mid-August. Where are we on that?
I expect to publish new guidelines by September 30th. That is my goal.
Do you expect that recent crossers will still be a priority on that?
I do.
Where are we on just enforcement for recent crossers? We had some information that we got in late last night from the ERO office saying that there's about 100, what was the final number here? 100 and, let me pull it up exactly, 107,817 individuals have been released into the United States from the ERO office with different statuses. That's been changed. That was the notice to report. That's now been changed to different notations on that. But 107,000 of those individuals, we have quite a few of those, tens of thousands, that have now not reported that would be recent crossings. One of the questions I'm going to have is, are we in pursuit of any of those individuals that did get a notice to report but then have not actually reported? Are those in the priorities, and have we actually picked up any of those folks for detention?
Senator, my understanding is of that figure, approximately 75% have indeed reported within the time frame or are within their reporting time frame. And as to those who have failed to report, that would qualify as an enforcement priority of ours.
Well, the best guess that we have at this point is about 28,963 as of last night are beyond their reporting time frame. That's around 29,000 people so far that have not reported, that were given a notice to report. That I just want to know, where are they, and are we actually pursuing those individuals?
Those individuals we do consider to be a priority for enforcement, Senator.
Okay, thank you. We'll wait for a second round.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Paul, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Director Wray, when Orwell first wrote 1984, people were concerned about that dystopian future, what it might mean. Big Brother invaded our privacy, our homes, our communications. But defenders of privacy took some consolation in the fact that the technology didn't exist for two-way TVs, and so much of it seems so futuristic. Now U.S. intelligence agencies have the ability to record and listen to every phone call in the world. We've sometimes collected phone calls from an entire country for an entire month at a time. We even have done it here at home in America. For years, the NSA collected millions of Americans' data without first having an individualized warrant. James Clapper notoriously lied, as we all know, to Congress about this massive surveillance program. He's now paid to deliver highly partisan rhetoric on a left-wing news outlet. Many in the FBI have been accused of bias. Some have been convicted. Some have been let go. McCabe, Klein Smith, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page. So it's kind of hard to argue that somehow we can get people in the FBI that are above bias. It seems to be something that goes with the territory. Maybe it was a bad spate of time where we had a whole bunch of them all at once, but it's a problem. When we investigate a presidential campaign, I think it's important that we realize the potential for bias that exists in the people bringing an investigation forward, but also incredibly important that we should devolve or at least consider using the Constitution and not using warrants that are used on foreigners. So we have two different standards. We have a constitutional standard, which is typically used for Americans, where we use the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment says you have to have probable cause, of a crime. The Fisa court standard is not a Fourth Amendment. It's an extra constitutional standard. It's less than the Constitution. It's probable cause of being associated with a foreign government. The problem is that when we have presidential candidates, they're all going to have foreign policy advisors. Most of them will have long-standing history in either government of some sort. They'll have people who do talk to foreigners all of the time. So you can see how someone with bias, and I think that's what happened during the investigation that turned out to be untrue on the Russia collusion. So we had a massive investigation of a presidential campaign. And I don't think enough of us have stepped back to say, well, my goodness, should we be using FISA warrants for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court? Should we be using that kind of warrant on an American, particularly an American running for office who has all of these contacts? Do you think it's appropriate that we use FISA court warrants to investigate presidential campaigns?
What I do think is appropriate is that we use FISA warrants to investigate counterintelligence threats to the United States, as long as it's done consistent with the minimization and querying procedures that are carefully approved.
You don't think there was any problem with this investigation with the Crossfire Hurricane? You think it was all completely appropriate? Nobody in the chain of command was biased, and it just occurred because they were curious? They just indicted one of the Clinton lawyers yesterday for lying to you guys. You guys took it hook, line, and sinker and said, oh, well, we'll just investigate a major presidential candidate. Of course there's a huge problem. And if you don't see that there's a problem and that we need more controls on this and that we need to somehow obey the Constitution, I would say the same for President Biden. I would say the same for a president of any party. What a crazy upturned world where there would be, the bias is there. There's no way to get it. The reason we have checks and balances with the judiciary is so we can kind of get over the potential bias that occurs in the FBI or the CIA or anywhere else. If you don't have to go to a court and you go to a court that doesn't obey the Constitution, that's held in secret, that's not justice, and it's going to be rife for abuse. You don't agree with that?
There are parts of what you said that I'd like to weigh in on. So first, as to what happened in the so-called Crossfire Hurricane matter, I would say to you today, and I have said publicly on a number of occasions, that what that Inspector General report describes by certain FBI personnel, I consider to be unacceptable and unrepresentative of the FBI that I see every day, having joined in 2017, and not something that I think can ever happen again. So I want to make sure that you and I are talking not past each other on that. Now, second, I've put in place over 40 corrective measures, everything the Inspector General has recommended, and then some, to make sure that what happened there does not happen again.
I think that's admirable, and I appreciate that point of view. But, when Hamilton wrote that if men were angels, we wouldn't need the Constitution, we still are relying on angels working at the FBI. We're relying on you saying we're going to get a better set of people, we're not going to have that bias anymore. I think that's admirable. That's what I would want in someone being the director. But what we need is something beyond that, and this is what our founding fathers did when they set up the Fourth Amendment, is we had a Constitution, and we had the Fourth Amendment, an incredibly important amendment, and then we had a judicial system. The FISA court doesn't obey the Fourth Amendment. It has a less than constitutional standard. It allows you to have warrants without obeying the Fourth Amendment. And people don't realize this. You use FISA warrants that do not obey the Fourth Amendment. You have a lower standard for going after foreigners. I'm actually okay with that. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you're investigating someone overseas and you're eavesdropping on them, I'm actually fine with the FISA standard. But I'm not fine with the FISA standard for Americans, particularly Americans who are running for office, particularly for the person running for the highest office who is interconnected with all kinds of countries and always will be. And once you get biased people, once there's not perfection, and we get biased people in the FBI, the problem is the system can be abused. I think the only fix It's admirable to have some regulations and some checks and balances you put in place, but the only real fix would be we should obey the Constitution. I don't think Americans nor political candidates should be investigated using a foreign intelligence surveillance court.
Thank you, Senator, for your kind words about the corrective measures we've put in place. I would say to you that I believe the FISA court operates within the Constitution, so we might have a difference of opinion in how we characterize it. I would also say to you that here, as we sit here 20 years after 9/11, and as somebody who was in FBI headquarters on the day of those attacks and saw the immediate aftermath, as we started to reverse engineer what went wrong on 9/11, much has been discussed back in those years about the so-called wall that was built up between law enforcement and intelligence. And a lot of the reforms that have occurred, thanks to this Congress, thanks to the courts, thanks to the executive branch, to make sure that there is not a wall between the information sharing that has to occur, has been part of what's kept Americans safe since then. So I would want, of course, to work with you on any ideas that you have, but also to make sure that we don't rebuild the wall that made us all less safe and cost 3,000 innocent lives on the day of those attacks. Thank you.
I appreciate your opinion on the FISA court having the same standard as the Constitution. They don't. The Fourth Amendment says you have to have probable cause that someone has committed a crime or is committing a crime. It's a much different standard. The FISA court standard is probable cause that you have a relationship with a foreign government. It's a much lower standard, much more open to abuse, and you don't have a public court or judges which might protect the rights of an individual. If what happened in Crossfire Hurricane is allowed to stand and would allow the FBI to do this again, we can see a time when the intelligence agencies can completely take over our political process. It's a very dangerous thing, and I think most people got caught up in the partisanship of the time, whether they liked or disliked President Trump. And instead of really thinking about this, there still is a problem. To my mind, we need to reform the FISA system, and we should not use FISA warrants on Americans. It should be reserved because it's a lower constitutional standard, should be reserved for foreigners.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Scott, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, each of you, for being here. Secretary Mayorkas, are you responsible for DHS, responsible for vetting all the Afghan refugees coming in?
I am responsible for the work of the department.
Sure. So since, let's say since the 1st of August, how many Afghan refugees have been denied entrance into the United States?
I don't have that number at my fingertips. I know it is very de minimis.
Okay.
In terms of...
Why would that be?
Because we have not found many people with derogatory information relative to those who qualify for admission to the United States by reason of their status.
Okay. So the Afghan refugees that have gotten into the United States in our bases, if you found something, what's your process? How could you send them home? What's your process for doing that?
So there are a number of options available to us, Senator. Number one, we can, of course, seek their voluntary return to a third country. Number two, we place them, if there is a reason to do so, we would place them in enforcement proceedings and seek their removal immediately.
And you believe you'd be able to send them back to Afghanistan?
Well, whether it's Afghanistan, that's something under review, but whether it's Afghanistan or another country, we would indeed seek their removal from the United States.
Okay. So your DHS was set up as a result of 9/11, right? And so and we've had significant military presence in Afghanistan for quite a while. It's gone. So now we don't have the same ability to defend the homeland that we did when we had military in Afghanistan. So what changes have you made to make sure that DHS is doing its job to make sure Americans are safe?
So, Senator, the architecture that has been built over 20 years since 9/11 remains in place and is only strengthened. We have a screening and vetting architecture. We have greater cooperation amongst the federal agencies in the counterterrorism, intelligence, and law enforcement communities. We remain ever vigilant in that regard.
Okay. Do you and Director Wray, do you agree that the Taliban is a terrorist organization?
I agree that the Taliban is a terrorist organization.
I believe it is identified as such, Senator.
Sure. So earlier this month, the Taliban announced the senior leadership. One notable appointment was Sirhan Haqqani to be Afghan's interior minister. He's on the FBI's most wanted list and designated as a global terrorist due to his role in the January 2008 attack on a hotel in Kabul that killed 6 people, including an American citizen. Director Wray, is there still a $10 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Haqqani?
To my knowledge, he remains on the list, and the reward is still out there.
Okay. All right. Do each of you agree that it seems to be counterintuitive that it would be against national security interests for somebody like that to be in senior leadership of the Taliban? We all agree with that, right?
Yes.
Yep. And we've had conflicting testimony about how many people are left there. We've had someone, Secretary Blinken said 100 citizens to 200. We've had earlier that it could be as much as 9,000. We don't know exactly what it is. First off, were 2 of you disappointed when our military came home without all the American citizens?
If I may, Senator, the United States government's enduring commitment is to bring every United States citizen that wants to return to the United States to bring them home. That is our enduring and continuing commitment.
But were you disappointed that it didn't happen before we brought our military home?
Our goal was to return every willing American citizen home, and of course we were disappointed if we were not able to accomplish that, but we have not stopped in our efforts.
Okay. Dr. Wray?
Well, certainly I would be disappointed if we don't do right by all those Afghans who worked so bravely side by side with us over the past 20 years. And that's why we're all working so hard, as Secretary Mayorkas said, to try to make sure that we get the right people, underline the right people, out where they can be brought to safety. I do want to clarify my answer to an earlier question. I've been handed a note that while the reward, this is on the Haqqani question, that while the reward is definitely still out there, that as I understand it, Haqqani may no longer be on the top 10 most wanted terrorists.
Well, he's still on the list.
But still to have the reward is still posted.
Okay, so how? So first off, were you, Dr. Wray, were you disappointed that we didn't get all of our, just even American citizens, let alone all the individuals that helped us? Were you disappointed that those all didn't come home before our military left?
Well, obviously, we want to make sure that we get all the right people out, including American citizens. I know that everybody worked very hard to move a massive amount of people in a very short period of time, and the FBI was able to play a small part in helping other agencies on that.
So what do the 2 of you believe is going to be our ability to continue to get Americans home, or on top of that, individuals that have helped us, when you've got a terrorist on our FBI most wanted list, or maybe not the top 10, but some number, and he's part of leadership there. What's our chance that actually this is going to happen, that we're going to get American citizens home, or Afghans that helped us?
We're extraordinarily dedicated to that, and I think Secretary Blinken has spoken powerfully about that actions will speak louder than words with respect to the Taliban's willingness to work with us to effect the evacuation of individuals who have worked with us or United States citizens that want to leave Afghanistan. I should say that a number of U.S. citizens are Afghan nationals and have expressed a desire to stay. So, but our commitment is enduring and unrelenting.
Yeah. So, Secretary Mayorkas, let's go to the border just for a second before I finish. Before you after you're nominated, we talked. You talked about you're going to enforce the law. Do you realize just when Senator Johnson was asking questions, you said that you thought the border was secure. Do you realize that if you talk to a typical American now and you hear the numbers, that over 1 million people have come here illegally this year? We only have a little over 300 million people live in this country. So 1 out of every 300 people in this country today have come here illegally in 8 months, right? Isn't that inconsistent with what you're saying, though? I mean,
Senator, I don't believe so. First of all, the number of encounters isn't necessarily individual encounters, but rather we see some level of recidivism in light of our exercise of the Title 42 expulsion authority under the CDC's legal powers. We apprehend, expel, and remove a considerable number of people. I know Senator Johnson took me to task for not having the data immediately at my fingertips in this hearing, but in fact, I do have some August numbers that I could provide that actually reflect the number of apprehensions, the distinction between total encounters and number of unique individuals encountered, the number of individuals expelled under Title 42, and the number of individuals processed for expedited removal under Title 8 of the United States Code. I do have those numbers for August.
So it's over 200,000 were apprehended, right?
In total encounters in August of 2021 was 208,887. Unique encounters were, meaning unique individuals, were 156,641.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Remind our members, we do have a second round. Thank you, Senator. Senator Romney, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for the work that you do to help keep our homeland safe. Director Wray, are the threats from the domestic violent extremists rising? And if they are they rising based on those that are, if you will, inspired from foreign groups, or are they rising from those that are inspired by domestic groups? Or, and I don't know whether you distinguish that way, but is it on the right? My impression is that it's substantially increasing, but largely domestic. But that may not be the case. So, are the threats greater from these individuals, and by source, domestic or international?
So we would, when it comes to sort of homeland-based terrorist threats, we have two buckets really that we primarily focus on as the highest priority right now. What we call homegrown violent extremists, which is a reference to people here radicalized by foreign terrorist organizations and ideologies. And then domestic violent extremists who are radicalized more by everything from racial animus all the way over to anti-government, anti-authority.
Right.
The first bucket, the homegrown violent extremists, has been humming along fairly consistently at about 1,000 investigations, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, over the last few years. The domestic violent extremist bucket has been going up quite significantly over the last few years, which is why we're now at 2,700 domestic terrorism investigations, when if you went back 2.5 years ago, we were probably at more about 1,000. So it's been a really significant jump there. We are concerned that with developments in Afghanistan, among other things, that there will be more inspiration to the first bucket as well. So I think we anticipate, unfortunately, growth in both categories as we look ahead over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that is daunting, and we may get a chance to talk about why you might believe that the latter group, the homegrown, domestic-inspired violent extremists, is rising. Secretary Mayorkas, I think any unbiased person would say that the Biden administration's border and immigration policies have been nothing short of a monumental disaster. And were there not so many other disasters that the administration is encountering, it probably would be by itself enough for a government to be hanging on by a thread. We've had our disagreements in the past about how much of the illegal immigration problem is caused by pull versus push factors, and your view that we need to address so-called root causes, which is poverty and corruption in other countries. My view is that we can't solve the problems of the rest of the world. In fact, we can't solve all of our own problems, let alone for the rest of the world. But what we can address are the unnecessary pull factors, if you will, the unnecessary features that we have in place that draw people into coming into our country illegally. And let me just discuss with taxes. If an illegal individual wants to work here and wants to pay U.S. taxes, they're able to do that. Is that right? They're able to do that by getting an identification number. Is that right?
I believe they are, Senator.
Yeah, I think they're called an I-10. They can apply for an I-10. They are able to do so. Under the administration's human infrastructure bill, their children can also get an I-10, can also get that tax number for the same purpose or for whatever purpose they might have.
I don't know the answer to your question, Senator.
The answer is yes, they can. The president's so-called human infrastructure bill also provides $300 per month for every child who obtains such a number. So under the bill that is being proposed and considered by Congress, we will be paying an illegal immigrant $300 per month for each and every one of their children that obtain such a number. So a family of 4 who'd come here illegally would receive as much as $1,200 per month in checks from the U.S. government. Well, of course, well above the wage and the average wage throughout major parts of Latin America. Do you think that this provision, which would allow the children of those that have come here illegally to receive monthly payments, would represent an unfortunate and damaging pull factor that would draw people more and more people into our country illegally?
Senator, I think that speaks to the fact that we have more than 11 million undocumented individuals already present in the United States, a population that has been growing for decades by reason of a broken immigration system. I don't think it speaks to individuals who have not arrived in the United States.
Well, clearly, if you can get paid $300 per child, even though the child is here illegally and you're here illegally, that's going to encourage people to come here. It also is going to represent a major expense for our government to pay the children of those that are here illegally $300 per month. It's one, it's expensive, and 2, it creates a greater draw to come to the country. Director, a question I'd ask you and perhaps the others as well, which is, it does strike me that 3 of you all have a very similar responsibility to protect our homeland from violence and extremists of various kinds. Are the lines of responsibility clear as to who is doing what, or do things fall between the cracks? Is there duplication, which is unnecessary? Should we be addressing how we organize this effort? Because I recognize we're asking all 3 of you very similar questions. You're looking at very similar aspects of the same challenge we have, which is protecting the homeland. Should we rethink how we do this? Are we duplicating the work? Or Director Ray, any one of you could respond to that.
Well, I guess I would speak to it from the perspective of somebody who was heavily involved in this mission on the day of 9/11 and in the first 4 years afterwards, and then coming back from the private sector now. And I think we are well organized against the terrorist threat. We do have, I would view as not overlapping responsibilities, but complementary ones. And I do think that one of the real positive developments learned the hard way from 9/11 is how well we all work together. Our folks in particular work well with other agencies as well on the terrorist threat. And I think there are valuable lessons to be learned from that. Doesn't mean that it can't always be improved. I tend to be dissatisfied by nature. So I expect continued improvement, but I think we're on the right track as far as that goes. And Lord knows we need it, because the threats, as we just discussed, are not getting easier, they're getting harder.
Thank you, Director.
Senator
Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Ossoff, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, Secretary Mayorkas, want to thank you and your team for responding to the bipartisan letter that I sent with Senator Scott requesting reforms to FEMA disaster relief practices that were discriminatory against Black Americans, especially in the South. Grateful to you and your team for making those reforms. Would like to ask you, please, how would you characterize the specific mission of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and what differentiates it from the other 17 component agencies in the intelligence community?
So if I can, it dovetails with the question that Senator Romney asked. I think we're cooperating and are more cohesive now than we ever have been before. And I think that to the extent that we sometimes have redundancies, those are intentional redundancies for a belt and suspenders approach to our homeland security and our national security. The Office of Intelligence and Analysis is really an office of partnership. What it does is it gathers information and intelligence from across the threat landscape. And what it is uniquely situated to do is to push that information and intelligence out to our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners so that the first responder community is equipped and empowered to address the threat in its communities. One of the things that the Office of Intelligence and Analysis has become so much better at over the past 9 months is, in fact, working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the Joint Terrorist Task Force model, and we partner in the dissemination of information bulletins, conference calls, and the like with local law enforcement.
Thank you. Director Abazade, how would you rate the quality of information sharing across the IC's 18 component agencies?
I actually think it's very strong, especially when you're talking about counterterrorism intelligence. I think the shift from in the post 9/11 environment was a shift to a need to share sort of mentality across the intelligence community, but also our state and local partners, our lead federal agencies in the Homeland, the FBI and DHS as well. So I've been very impressed as I've come back in to lead the center with the degree of information sharing that happens across the intelligence community in classified channels. But I've also been very impressed by the degree to which we work to downgrade as much information as possible and engage directly with state, local, tribal, and territorial elements to make sure that we're getting the threat information to the right individuals so they're enabled to take action where they need to.
Thank you, Director Abazade. Director Wray, we spoke March 2nd in the Judiciary Committee about the extent of violence in communities across the country, the alarming increase in violent crime, particularly from 2019 to 2020, also from 2020 until this year. City of Atlanta, 113 homicides this year. That's a 16% increase from last year, a 64% increase from 2019. Georgians are deeply concerned by the intensity of violence in our communities. When we spoke in March, you said you were going to work to refine your assessments of the factors driving this increase in violent crime and violence across the United States. What are your conclusions?
So I do think as much as it's a phenomenon in our home state of Georgia, it is also in other parts of the country as well. And while there might be variations from city to city, I think there's a number of factors that contribute to it. I think the impact of COVID cannot be underestimated, whether it's trial backlogs, early inmate releases, unemployment, et cetera. You have more juveniles committing violent crime. You have certain prosecution practices and decreased sentences, which put recidivists back out on the street more readily, and that adds to its challenge. You also have the prevalence of firearms, including interstate trafficking. By that I mean firearms in the hands of those who are prohibited, legally prohibited from having them. So all those factors together create a combustible mix. I would add into that a number of police departments, our close partners that we work with every day, who have an incredibly challenging job, are experiencing recruiting challenges and attrition that is in early retirement, and that in turn adds to it. So you put no one factor by itself, but you put all those things together, and that's part of why you're seeing, I think, the increase in homicides. You're also seeing increases in carjackings and other violent crimes, not just in Atlanta, not just in Georgia, but in cities all over the country. And it's something that I suspect every member of this committee hears about from its constituents with increasing frequency for good reason.
Thank you, Director Wray. Mr. Secretary, a couple of questions related to congressional oversight of the department. I recognize you've got a tough job. You and I have spoken in public and in private about the importance of responsiveness to the Senate, to this committee, to the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair and for which Senator Johnson's the ranking member. But a number of requests that we sent to the department back in July, we still have not seen timely production of relevant documents and records. I want to ask why. I also want to state here publicly for the record while we've got you that regardless of the administration's party, the Senate has an obligation to conduct vigorous oversight and to be assertive in using our authorities and prerogatives to secure the information necessary to oversee the executive branch past and current activities. And In my capacity as chair of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, I intend to be assertive in seeking that information. But could you comment, please, on why these requests, now 3 months outstanding, remain outstanding?
Forgive me, your concern is resonant. In fact, we've done an internal review of the pace of our responsiveness, and we've implemented new procedures to ensure a greater responsiveness. That is indeed an obligation of ours and a commitment of ours and a commitment of mine personally. I will say it is quite a daunting challenge. We have over 90 committees of jurisdiction. It is something about which I have spoken with this committee, both as the secretary and in my prior service as the deputy secretary. It is a daunting number of requests for information and requests for production of documents that we receive. Nevertheless, that is a commitment and an obligation of ours, and we'll do a better job of fulfilling it.
But where are those documents requested in July, Mr. Secretary?
I will have to look into that, Senator, and I will do so forthwith.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. For the panel, you've been going a long time, and I know that a break is warranted. But so what I'm planning on doing is we have Senator Hawley up, Senator Rosen. That gets us really close to an expected vote, so it'll be a good time to take a break at that time. So if you could bear with us for at least 2 more questions, unless someone else shows up, but we'll take a break and then have a second round of questions at that time. Senator Hawley, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Secretary, Secretary Mayorkas, let me start with you. I want to ask you about the continued uncontrolled illegal immigration into the country, which I think is a very serious threat to the homeland. In July, I asked you about the migrant surge that's been occurring on your watch, and you said this, I'm quoting you now, "We have a plan. We are executing the plan. The plan takes time to execute, and we are doing so." Now, since that time, CBP has released data that showed 2 straight months of illegal border encounters above 200,000, which, as you know, hasn't happened in decades. My question is, when is your plan going to work?
So, in fact, we are implementing the plan, Senator Hawley, and I can walk through some of the measures that we have taken.
My question is, when is it going to work?
So it is, in fact, working. We have seen over the last several weeks, if not the month, a drop in the number of encounters at the United States border. We have been working very closely with Mexico to increase interdictions. We have addressed the issue of recidivism, and if, in fact, people have been previously removed, we are referring them to criminal prosecution. We have increased lateral flights across the border to facilitate the expulsion of individuals under Title 42.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Secretary. Except our time is so limited. I just want to be sure that I understand. 200,000 border encounters over 2 straight months, a record in decades, for over decades. And you're telling me that this is success? Are you happy with what's happening at the border now? Is this success?
Senator, as I said then and I say now, we have a plan. We're executing on our plan, and we will continue to do so.
But you just testified that it's working. I'm just trying to understand. Is this success? Are you telling me that this is successful? Your plan is successful currently?
Senator, we are not finished in the execution of our plan, and I never suggested otherwise. We continue to do the work that we are required to do to secure our border. That is an ongoing process, and indeed we are executing it.
Are you happy with your progress?
Senator, we need to do better, and we need to do more, and we are committed to doing so, and we are doing so.
Let me ask you about one of the latest crises that we've seen in Del Rio. Thousands of migrants crossing the border illegally. Reporters have captured images of this. Many are now encamped, as you know, on the U.S. side of the border. How many migrants have crossed into the United States in Del Rio over the past week?
So last week, I think the high point was 13 to 15,000. It is now well below 10,000. We continue to move individuals from Del Rio to other processing centers to facilitate their repatriation.
And how
increased, if I may, Senator, we have increased the number of repatriation flights to Haiti and to other third countries. The size of the population in Del Rio, Texas, has diminished considerably. And let me say 2 very important things which I observed firsthand in Del Rio, Texas yesterday. Number 1 is the human tragedy, just the vulnerability of the individuals who are under the bridge in Del Rio. We cannot minimize that. It is an extraordinarily difficult thing to see. Number two, I met with quite a number of Border Patrol agents and officers in Del Rio, Texas. I saw them working with members of the Department of Health and Human Services to deliver medical attention. I saw them working with the American Red Cross to deliver medical kits.
How many are currently right, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, but we've got very limited time. How many are currently right now at the encampment?
I'd have to check as to today's numbers. It is below 10,000 is the latest information I have.
I just want to go back to your statement earlier to me that you have a plan and that it's working. Is 13 to 15,000 people crossing into the United States just last week? Is that working?
So, Senator, if you take a look at the situation, the discrete situation in Del Rio, Texas, one will view it differently than other challenges along the southern border. That was a very rapid, if I may, Senator, that was a very rapid increase. Really unprecedented increase in the number of individuals, primarily Haitian nationals, crossing in one discrete part of the border. And what we did there is we developed a plan, and we were executing on that plan, and therefore—
Mr. Secretary, this happened on your watch. Listen, here's the problem. Every time before you come before this committee, you always say, it's going to get better. Our plan is going to work at some future point. And you also usually say it's really not as bad as it looks. And then every time you leave, it gets worse and worse. This is a humanitarian crisis in Del Rio. You can spin it whichever way that you want. But you're quite right. We should not minimize the humanitarian conditions for which, frankly, you're responsible. You and your administration are responsible. Tens of thousands of people living in conditions that are startling, brought here because of your policies. Let me give you an example. The Washington Post reported on Sunday that one Haitian woman said that she and her family decided to travel from Chile, where she was residing, to Del Rio because they heard, and I quote, President Biden was letting people in. And of course, you've offered this temporary protected status to Haitians illegally residing in the United States starting in May. Then you halted deportation flights earlier this summer. Don't you think that you bear responsibility for this latest crisis?
Senator, let me speak to a number of the things that you have said. Number one, temporary protected status was in fact extended to Haitian nationals resident in the United States before July 29th. Individuals who arrive after July 29th are not eligible for temporary protected status. That is a provision of the law that we execute based on the circumstances that are contemplated in the legislation.
But Mr. Secretary, my time has almost expired. I just want an answer. Do you bear responsibility for the crisis in Del Rio?
Second, Senator.
Does that mean you're not going to answer me?
I am answering if you'd give me the opportunity.
That's a yes or a no question. Do you bear responsibility for the crisis in Del Rio? Yes or no?
Senator, the smuggling organizations.
Yes or no, Mr. Secretary? Do you bear responsibility for the humanitarian crisis in Del Rio? Yes or no?
Senator, it is my responsibility to address the human tragedy in Del Rio, to address that, and we are doing so. That is my responsibility, and we are executing it as the Department of Homeland Security.
But you don't think you've played any role, and your policies have played any role in fostering and fomenting this crisis that has ensnared so many thousands of people?
Senator, what we are learning from our interviews with individuals is they are receiving false information and misinformation from the smuggling organizations that traffic in the exploitation of vulnerable individuals.
Well, so in other words, it's someone else's fault. All I can say is, Mr. Secretary, is that sooner or later, this administration is going to have to take responsibility for the crisis that you have fomented at the border that gets worse day upon day. And so far, every time we hear from you, it's somebody else's fault. Something's going to happen later. It's quite unbelievable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley, thank you. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, holding this very important hearing here today. And I appreciate the difficult service that all of you provide to keep our nation safe. Thank you for being here. I want to talk a little bit about domestic terrorism. I'm going to switch up a little bit. 20 years after 9/11, we know threats to the homeland, they've only become more diverse, they've become more complex, and the rapidly growing threat, we all know this, domestic violent extremism. If you've testified before, Director Wray, especially in March, that the number of domestic terrorist investigations has doubled since 2017 to 2,000 this year. The Bureau has now elevated the threat of domestic extremism to the same level as posed by ISIS. And Secretary Mayorkas, you recently stated, I'm going to quote, that domestic violent extremism is the greatest terrorist-related threat we face in our homeland. And so I applaud the administration for releasing the first ever national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, which codifies a national strategy that domestic violent extremists, specifically white supremacist extremists, pose the most persistent and lethal threat to the United States, the most persistent and lethal threat. So I have a question, of course, for Director Wray and for you, Mr. Secretary. I will go first. Secretary Mayorkas, could you provide us with an update on the new Center for the Prevention Programs and Partnerships, or as you're calling it, CP3, which helps prevent individuals from radicalizing into domestic violent extremism and interferes when individuals unfortunately do so?
Thank you very much, Senator. That office, that Center for Prevention Programs and Partnership, is really executing a different strategy than has previously been undertaken. What we are doing is focused on disseminating information to local communities and empowering and equipping them to address the reasons why people are driven to extreme ideologies and perhaps even acts of violence. And we are distributing grant funds as well as information. It's all about empowering and equipping communities to address the situation from the ground up.
Well, nobody knows their own community better than those that work within it. Thank you. Director Wray, I want to direct this next question to you. I understand the FBI Counterterrorism Division maintains a section to specifically investigate, of course, domestic terrorism. Are you collecting data specifically on the threat from white supremacists? And secondly, as part of the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, how does the FBI plan to enhance collaborative reporting, that data collection that we need, and we can collaborate targeting our efforts with law enforcement partners to prevent radicalization and attacks?
We do collect information very much about, I think the category that you're describing, we put in the category of racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism, of which the biggest chunk by far is racial or ethnic motivation favoring white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And so we collect information about that threat. We have, as you say, prioritized that threat at a national threat priority level. We have created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell to bring to bear not just the domestic terrorism expertise, but the hate crimes expertise, because often there's some overlap in the criminal activity and, more importantly, the insights that gives us to look ahead and around the bend, if you will. And one of the places where that kind of collaboration and synergy is already showing great progress is in your home state, the attempted attack on a synagogue that we were able to, for the first time, prevent using hate crimes charges. And we hope to do more of that. I think the big part of the engagement to collaborate on data is going to be through the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, which, of course, are all over the country, of which there are over 200. And that includes federal, state, local participants, probably about 4,500 or so bodies all working on those task forces together, able to share classified information, investigative information, and to ensure that we're then able to generate bulletins and things like that, working collaboratively with Secretary Mayorkas' shop in doing so.
And I'm going to move into cybersecurity, but before I do that, do you have the workforce you need, and what are the challenges you have? I guess I could probably address this in every area. Hiring, training, and retaining workforce.
Well, I would say that a couple things on that. Certainly, the domestic terrorism caseload has exploded. And meanwhile, the international terrorism caseload hasn't subsided, and that's just within terrorism. So we absolutely need more resources there, and any resources Congress sees fit to send our way, I can assure you they would be quickly put to good use. On the, there is a piece of good news, which is that at the FBI, the last couple of years, our recruiting numbers have gone exorbitantly up. contrary to the trend you would see more generally in the country. So we tripled the number of people applying to be special agents of the FBI in 19, 20, and 21 compared to what it was before that. Highest it's been in about a decade. We are not having too many retirements. Our attrition rate is now down to under 1%, which is, I would say, pretty good. But the counterbalancing against that is the unbelievable challenge of all these threats that we're dealing with. And there's a lot of people with great ideas and good ideas about what we should be doing more of. I haven't found anybody with much in the way of good ideas about what it is we can suddenly do less of.
Thank you. I want to just move quickly, and I know I'll probably have to take this answer off the record, but cybersecurity resilience, because the Cyberspace Solarium Commission said the U.S. government still lacks rigorous, codified, and routinely exercised processes for identifying, assessing, and prioritizing critical infrastructure risks across the federal government between public and private sectors. So, Secretary Mayorkas, what infrastructure sectors do you think, do you view as particularly vulnerable that we should be putting some resources into right now?
So Senator, thank you so much for your question. We're very focused on the critical infrastructure sectors. As a matter of fact, I think one of the great moves that we made following the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack that really galvanized the public attention was for TSA to issue two sequential security directives after engaging with the pipeline industry to develop standards of behavior to increase the cybersecurity of that sector. I think the joint cyber collaborative that we are employing through CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is a very significant step in strengthening critical infrastructure because it's a public-private partnership. It's not just all of government, but it's all of society.
Thank you. Appreciate that. See, my time is up.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen.
Before we could break, because I forgot to ask this, I'd ask that we ask consent that we enter recently retired U.S. Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott's letter into the record. And I would also point out that in his letter, he describes himself as a law enforcement agent for over 29 years. He served under 5 different presidential administrations, and he said he worked diligently to secure international borders as a nonpartisan civil servant. So this letter comes from somebody with a great deal of credibility and should be taken very seriously. But anyway, I'd ask it to be entered in the record.
Without objection, it'll be entered. We have another senator that joined us. Senator Sinema is online. This will be end the first round. I'll recognize Senator Sinema. This will end the first round. It'll come to a close. We'll take a break at that time and then come back for a second round. Senator Sinema, you're recognized for your questions.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, one of the significant challenges our nation and my state of Arizona face is the ongoing crisis at the southwest border. It remains critical for Congress and the administration to work together to secure the border, protect our communities, and ensure migrants are treated fairly and humanely. I appreciate the efforts you've taken to improve DHS operations at the border. As we both know, there's more work to do. We've seen close to 1.5 million encounters at the border this fiscal year, with over 270 of those happening in the Tucson and Yuma sectors. CPB officials in those sectors consistently talk about the importance of Title 42 authority in managing the situation at the border in those sectors. But recent court decisions could limit the use of Title 42 authority in the future, which would put more pressure on our border workforce and processing capacity. Additionally, with the severe challenges in the Del Rio sector, we learned last week that CBP will be transporting 400 migrants each week to Arizona for processing. So what steps does DHS need to take to improve processing capacity and capability at the southwest border to manage this ongoing crisis, including the situation we're seeing in Del Rio?
Thank you so much, Senator. So we've taken a number of steps, some of which I alluded to earlier in my response to Senator Hawley's question. We are moving individuals across the southwest border to facilitate the expulsions under the Center for Disease Control Title 42 authority. We are using expedited removal under Title 8 as an additional authority. We have begun prosecution of individuals who have prior removal orders and who are recidivists. We are sending flights, repatriation flights, into the interior of Mexico to make recidivism more difficult. We are employing quite a number of measures to increase the number of encounters and also to deter irregular migration, and we are seeing progress in that regard.
Now, following up specifically on Title 42, obviously court decisions will play a significant role in the future of Title 42, but this authority was always meant to be temporary and will end at some point. In June, as you know, I led a bipartisan letter that requested a detailed plan for the end of Title 42. I'm asking today if you'll work with my office to schedule an in-depth briefing for the committee on your plans to facilitate a smooth and orderly transition for the end of Title 42, when DHS will resume relying only on traditional statutory authorities.
We most certainly will do so, Senator.
Thank you. Now, as you're aware, transnational criminal organizations pose a significant threat to our national security by engaging in human trafficking, drug trafficking, and violence at our southwest border. They may also be capitalizing on the DHS resource strain that the migrant influx is causing. So what capabilities or technologies does DHS need additional investments in to expand your ability to counter TCO activity?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. I will say that we're already taking and have taken a number of steps to address the actions of TCOs. We are working increasingly in the task force model as a force multiplier. We are using technology, air assets, especially our force multipliers, and extremely effective tools. We can use more resources with respect to our air assets. And we have undertaken a number of law enforcement operations to address the activities of these transnational criminal organizations. Operation Sentinel, which addresses their logistical network here in the United States, is but one example.
Thank you. My next question is for Director Wray. The pseudonymity afforded to criminal organizations such as DarkSide that demands ransom payments in cryptocurrency provides significant challenges to federal law enforcement. How has the FBI changed its response capacity at its field offices to help families, small businesses, and managers of critical infrastructure respond to the rise in ransomware attacks?
So I appreciate the question. Certainly, ransomware attacks, as Secretary Mayorkas referred to earlier, have gone up, and the total volume of payments have gone up, both quite significantly. And it affects, as you say, Senator, not just large organizations, but also small ones. And what the FBI can do and is doing is we have cyber task forces in all 56 field offices. And each of them is designed in part to be able to engage quickly with victims, to be able to respond as quickly as possible to help them manage and disrupt and mitigate against the threat. We, on the virtual currency side, the cryptocurrency side, we have created subject matter teams, experts at headquarters that both train, so create more of a force multiplier effect in all the field offices, but also support investigations because, as you say, following the money in that space is exceptionally challenging and requires new and more creative, innovative tactics, much as we did, for example, in the Colonial Pipeline case, where we were able to not only follow but seize a big chunk of the ransom that was being paid in cryptocurrency before it got to the bad actors. And we want to do more of that, but that case illustrates in particular the importance of the private sector, big or small, engaging with the FBI as quickly as possible. Speed really matters in these instances, and when they do engage that quickly, there's all kinds of things that we can potentially do to follow the money.
Thank you, Director. Back to Secretary Mayorkas. You know, the world has changed a great deal since DHS was established in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. And today, the department has a responsibility for a wide swath of disparate missions. You handle counterterrorism, border security, transportation security, disaster response, as well as cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection. So as new threats confront our country, how is DHS assessing and adjusting its structure to respond to the changing threat landscape? And what changes do you feel are needed in the short term?
One of the things, Senator, that we are focused on is making sure that our more than 22 offices and agencies are working cohesively together to really bring the full force of the department to bear on any one particular threat stream. I think we've made tremendous advances in that regard. Fundamentally, I think our greatest tool in combating the threats of whatever nature is really the more than 250,000 men and women who comprise our department. They're extraordinary, not only in meeting the threat that we confront today, but in their readiness to meet the threat that looms.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Chair, I know that my time has expired, but I want to note that as we were having our first hearing after the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, I want to take a moment just to express my thanks to all the people who work every day to keep our country safe. And as our threats continue to evolve, our government must continue to adapt and make changes based on the lessons we've learned since September 11th. And I'm grateful for the men and women across our country who are doing just that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Well, I know our witnesses, we were thanking you for these answers to all these questions, but it's time for a little bit of a break for you. We have a second round. That concludes the first round. Not every senator is coming back for a second round, but I know there are a number that have other questions they would like to ask. So I will adjourn now briefly for roughly 10 minutes. There has been a vote called, so I would urge all of our members, please vote early. Get back to the committee hearing room so that we can move this forward. So with that, we will adjourn for 10 minutes. Committee comes back into order. We'll now begin a second round of questions, same 7-minute time as the first round. Although, Senator Padilla, before I start the second round, you were not here for the first round, and you have not had a chance to ask a question, so you are recognized for your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this opportunity, and thank you to the three leaders participating this morning. Want to touch on an issue that's an ongoing challenge in so many sectors, and that is the power, the danger of misinformation. So as we all know, that despite the arduous journey from Central America or elsewhere to the United States, migrants continue to make the dangerous trek to the U.S. border in hopes for a better life. Many are fleeing unemployment or natural disasters, maybe corruption in their home countries, violence, or other factors, and it certainly makes coming to the United States appealing. Another factor, however, is misinformation, particularly from smugglers who share messages over a variety of platforms, including but not limited to WhatsApp, with the promise of safe passage to the United States for a large sum of money. Now, while most immigrants are being turned away or expelled from the southern border because of the CDC's Title 42 rule, misinformation continues to spread. I'd love to hear from Secretary Mayorkas about not just the impacts you're observing of misinformation, but also what the Department of Homeland Security is doing to combat this misinformation, both at the border in Central America or elsewhere.
Senator, thank you very much for your question, because you are focused on a very significant issue. Indeed, the smuggling organizations peddle misinformation and deceive vulnerable individuals and families into believing that the border policies of this administration are different than those that we have in place and that we are executing. We, of course, disseminate information ourselves, but we're very mindful of the fact that that alone is not enough. We work very closely with the Department of State to have trusted voices in the countries of origin to disseminate accurate information with respect to our policies and practices and the critical fact that our border is not open. I think one example of that is this past Sunday. I spoke with journalists who reached the Haitian community, the Haitian diaspora community, and I communicated the critically needed messages. They then disseminated that in Creole through their outlets to reach the diaspora community, and that was propelled further on social media thanks to the partnership with the Department of State and other partners.
That's great. And I know it'll be an ongoing challenge as well. Second, more of a statement than a question, but I want to go on record in the following. As most will admit, what's happening at the border is unacceptable on so many fronts. And I, too, want to strongly condemn the inhumane treatment of Haitians or anyone else who is fleeing violence or natural disasters and seeking protection in our countries. I have heard your statements, Mr. Secretary, about the need to create safer and more orderly pathways of legal migration to the United States so that people do not have to make the dangerous journey to the southern border by other means. Want to make sure I reserve sufficient time for Ms. Abazade. As of September 14th, some 64,000 Afghans have been brought safely into the United States. Many of these individuals were allies of the United States military, have familial ties to the United States, or represent vulnerable populations who are currently being targeted by the Taliban. I understand that many of my colleagues have raised questions as to whether or not there has been sufficient vetting of these individuals prior to their arrival to the United States or entry into the United States. So in your role as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, can you please just share with us or give us a better appreciation, understanding of the vetting process that Afghan refugees, parolees, and evacuees must pass before being allowed to be admitted into the United States?
Thank you, Senator, for the question, especially because it gives me the opportunity to really highlight publicly the work that NCTC, but also the entire intelligence community working in collaboration with our FBI, DHS, and other partners in the agency did to surge resources to make sure that the appropriate screening and vetting of these individuals was undertaken. Now, the intelligence community role and NCTC's role is one part of a system of screening and vetting. It is something that we typically get information from our partners overseas to understand individuals, the information about individuals seeking to come to the United States. We use that information and run it against our IC databases to make sure that if there's any derogatory information that might have bearing on whether that individual should come or not, that we bring that to bear as adjudicators decide the status of an individual. The work that we undertook as part of the Afghan evacuation operation absolutely considered that screening process as part of it. And those screening efforts are ongoing for the population of Afghans that are seeking entry into the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Well, as we've been discussing throughout this hearing, we have been subjected to consistent cyber attacks, ransomware in particular, and attacks against critical infrastructure. And Secretary Mayorkas, in your opening statement, you discussed a number of activities the DHS is engaged in an attempt to mitigate the impact of these attacks or prevent these attacks from occurring in the first place. And as you know, and I believe you've been briefed and your staff has been working with Ranking Member Portman and I on legislation to provide the government with incident reporting on cyber incidents and ransomware attacks in particular, but broadly encompassing all cyber attacks. So Secretary Mayorkas, could you tell this committee how this kind of authority to collect this information, how will that help you prevent cyber attacks from occurring in the first place and ensure that our critical infrastructure can operate the way it should?
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Portman, we're very grateful for this committee's support of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That legislation, which calls for a new reporting regime, will be of tremendous value in elevating the cybersecurity of this country because it really requires a public-private partnership. And if, in fact, for example, a company that suffers a cyber incident provides that information to us in the federal government, then we can ensure that a replicate of that harm is not suffered elsewhere in the country. If everyone is compelled to provide incident information to us, then we learn from one, we learn from two, and collectively then we disseminate to all, and that raises the cyber hygiene of the landscape writ large.
Thank you. And Director Wray, I know ransom payment information is of importance to the FBI. Could you tell the committee how important that is and how this legislation will help you?
Absolutely. I think the key will be to make sure that the information reaches the FBI real time, because as I testified in response to one of the earlier questions, speed, hours matter in this particular arena. Getting the information from the private sector on a more consistent and timely basis will be critical for us at the FBI as well for, I think, 5 reasons. One, it allows us to better understand the full extent of the threat of particular intrusion sets nationwide. Second, it enhances our ability to warn about trends, tactics, techniques, procedures in a much more meaningful way. Third, it allows us to provide support for a greater number of victims and collect more evidence and therefore bring more cases. Fourth, it allows us to help connect seemingly unrelated incidents into attribution to a single actor, which is incredibly valued in its own right to ensure that we're holding them accountable for the full extent of their activity. But then last but not least, it allows us to follow the money and in many cases seize it. And I can't underscore enough how important that is. Our strategy is to go after the actors, their infrastructure, and their money. And legislation like this would help us do that as long as we get the information, real time.
Thank you. On March 2021, National Intelligence Report assessed that domestic violent extremists were, and I quote, the most persistent and lethal threat, unquote, to the United States. The FBI has found the same, and I helped pass a requirement in the fiscal year 20 NDAA that required both the FBI and the DHS to report data on this threat. Yet both of your agencies took close to a year to provide roughly half of the response that we were looking for, a year to provide half. And Director Wray, in the case of the FBI, half would be a very generous assessment of what the FBI provided. It's considerably less than that. And if we can't get that kind of data, it's difficult for us to understand what efforts are being made and how we might be able to support those efforts. You have reporting requirements under the law, and I would hope that you would comply on time and in full. Can I get a commitment that we can get the rest of that information that's well over a year past the expected date?
Well, certainly you could have my commitment that we're going to do better and work with you as quickly as we can to get you the information that we can. Part of the challenge that we're not happy about is, of course, the pandemic hit, and many of the people that were involved in pulling together the information were either otherwise occupied with the significant domestic terrorism operations that we had or otherwise sidelined. The other part of it is, as I understand it, a lot of the information may be information that wasn't collected or kept in a way that the committee might have been looking for. So you are absolutely right that we need to do better than we have, and you have my commitment that we will do better than we have. But I understand we have a regular cadence now of engagement with your staff, prioritizing the items that you need soonest, and you have my commitment that we'll work with you on that.
Well, I appreciate that, and we will we'll be continuing to reach out to get that to happen. You know, experts have assessed that in the last 5 years, domestic extremist groups have expanded their use of online platforms to recruit, plan, export, and spread violence and terrorize Americans. Last week, I wrote a letter to the heads of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube seeking information, including their efforts to coordinate with federal, state, and local governments to detect and to prevent online extremist efforts. So my question to you, Director Wray, is we're less than a year past the violent January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and an attempt to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, which is without question a dark stain on our history, all of which was planned, organized, and spread online. So my question is, what specific steps is the FBI doing now to combat the use of social media to plan domestic terrorist attacks? Have you stepped up your activities and give us a sense of what you are doing?
So certainly when it comes to social media, when we get tips and leads, we're trying to make sure that those are being prioritized and pursued. We're trying to improve our own communications with the social media companies. That partnership, as you and I have discussed before in the election influence context, has continued to improve. And so we're trying to leverage that a little bit. Among the other things that we're trying to do are build out our human source base better so that we can separate kind of the wheat from the chaff within the social media information that we get, because the volume of this stuff is just astounding. And then last, we're also looking at better use of data analytics, again, to try to see if we can separate the wheat from the chaff within the information that we get. Certainly when it comes to looking at social media, there are longstanding Department of Justice policies, the so-called Attorney General guidelines, and the DIOG that have been in place for 15, 16, maybe more years that kind of govern what we can and cannot do, and it gets a complicated subject to explain. But we are committed to aggressively acting in this space just as we are in others. I would say, of course, I know that DHS also plays a very important role in looking at social media, and we benefit from the partnership with them on that subject. There are things that they can do as part of their mission that we can't and don't.
Thank you. Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by saying that I appreciate what the men and women who work for you do every day. They wake up every morning and try to figure out how to keep our country safe. And I think every member of this panel appreciates that and commends them. I do think our policies are making it hard for them. And that's what this is really about today is what can we change policy-wise to reduce rather than enhance the threats to our homeland. As I said earlier, I think it's extraordinary that over these 20 years we haven't had a major mass casualty foreign terrorist event. We certainly had our share of attacks, but not the kind we saw on 9/11, and that's a tribute to them. But our policies worry me. And I'd like to dig a little deeper on a couple of them quickly. I appreciate what you said on the social media, Director Wray, and certainly in the cybersecurity. We look forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary, as you know, on that legislation to ensure we have incident reporting and we get our handle on the increasing cyber threat and the ransomware. But on these two issues we've already talked about today, one is the Afghan evacuees and the potential problems we may have if we don't have a system in place, a policy in place that makes the people, again, who work for you and others able to do their job. I'm concerned about it. And second is with regard to immigration. Getting back to what has been said about those individuals who were evacuated in this hasty and chaotic process, we left people behind. We all know that. We left American citizens behind, but mostly we left behind people who had helped us. But we also had people get on these flights to leave who, as far as we know at this point, had no connection to us in the sense of helping us or helping our allies. And Secretary Mayorkas, your information is probably different than mine based on what you have said today. We have pushed and pushed, as you know, and as I said, I'm very frustrated we can't get a classified briefing maybe to dig in the bottom of this, but we don't really need, in my view, a classified briefing. We just need to know who these folks are. And by the way, it may surprise some of our constituents to find out that when these folks come over, and again, about 60,000 are here, about 120,000 total, 60,000 are still overseas, they're permitted to walk. In other words, when they land at Dulles or land in Philadelphia, they're allowed to leave and go into the community. Is that accurate, Ms. Secretary? Just a yes or no, please.
No, that is not entirely accurate, Senator. There are conditions of parole for those who are paroled into the United States that are mandatory. So, for example,
but if when they land, if they choose not to go to the military base and to walk, they're able to do that.
They must receive, for example, certain immunizations in order to enter the interior of the United States.
Well, I mean, okay, so they have to get.
There are mandatory, but
they have to get a shot. That's fine, but they're permitted to come into our country, and you know, my staff has been out there to see the arrivals. I have a friend who went to meet his interpreter, who he served in Afghanistan, and you know, they said you can take him with you, but if you do, he could lose his benefits. I understand that, but my point is, we don't have a system in place to keep people who want to walk. Now, the other question is, who are these people? And as I said, 75% of them are not green card holders, they're not citizens, they're not SIV holders, they're not even applicants for SIV. You indicated otherwise, so we just need to get to the bottom of it, because you want to know, I assume, just as we want to know, how we can ensure who these people are. And this notion that they've been vetted as we would normally vet, I mean, how can we vet people? Are you going to call the Taliban government and say, is this information about this criminal record accurate? Of course we can't. Normally we would be able to contact the government. Of course we didn't have an embassy because we had evacuated it. So we didn't go through the normal screening. To Director Abazade, your answer earlier, we didn't go through the normal screening process that you would for someone applying for a visa. You couldn't, because we didn't have the visa officials in the foreign office there to do it. So I'm just going to leave that out there, because I mean, I have lots of more questions on it, and I could push on what we've heard. But let me just say, yesterday when the State Department was pushed on this and we were asked how many of those parolees applied for SIV or were family members of former employees, the State Department said, quote, "None of us really know," end quote. If that's the answer, fine. But if the answer is, as you said today, Mr. Secretary, they're all accounted for and we know who they are, we'd certainly like to know that. With regard to immigration, this obviously is a huge crisis right now on the border. Again, over 200,000 people last month. And let me just hold up these couple of charts, because they're interesting, I think, for a number of reasons. One is with regard to encounters at the border. We've seen this chart. Senator Johnson's got a much more colorful, interesting chart. But this is where we are, and I've condensed it a little bit just to start, in the 2018 time period. This is when President Biden is inaugurated. We see this big increase. So we all know about that. And this is why policies, again, are making the job much harder for the people who you work with to be able to keep an orderly and legal process at the border. This is obviously a crisis. But here's the second one. Maybe keep them together if you can. Hold this one up, too. This is the people who are coming to our border from outside of Mexico or El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, so-called Northern Triangle. Look at that. That increase is much more dramatic. And these are people who come from Latin America, but they also come from Romania. I mean, they're coming from all over the world. We obviously seen them coming from Haiti. And the photos of what's going on there, I mean, look at this chart. I mean, it's obviously a humanitarian crisis. It's really discouraging to see. But what we're told is very different than what we've heard today. We're told by ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, that only 353 Haitians have been flown back to Haiti out of the 13 to 15,000 that you said were there. And yet you're telling us today, we're taking care of it, the number's well below 10,000. That must mean that they were either removed to Mexico or released. I don't think they were removed to Mexico, because part of the problem with Title 42 is Mexico's not taking people unless they're Spanish-speaking from Latin America. So we need to have our information clear. And in terms of why they came, I think this idea of a pull factor is very real. You know how I feel about the asylum system. I think it's a pull factor. And as I told you, I visited some of these countries in Latin America and Central America recently, and the presidents of these countries say, we don't like what you guys are doing because you're pulling our good people away, you're pulling our young people away. We want them to stay here, actually. But they're coming to the border not because of disinformation necessarily, as Senator Padilla talked about, and I appreciated his question, but a lot of it's accurate information, because the smuggler can say, the human smuggler can say to his family, give me $10,000, I'll take your kid, I guarantee they can get in. Just say you are seeking asylum. And with regard to the Haitians, this is what you hear. The mayor of Del Rio, I believe, said this, and others have said it, that Section 8, which is not Section 42, was being applied to Haitians, and the word got out, and the smugglers heard about it. And they said, Haitians are getting in under Section 8. In other words, they're permitted to come into the country. And boom, then they came, of course. On Section 42, the Rodney Scott letter, which we got by snail mail, so I didn't get it until over the weekend, and we've circulated to all the offices now, but and it's part of the record today. He says in October 2020, he was told that 91% of total encounters were processed under Title 42, and people were expelled on an average of 90 minutes. He said, a report I received in August 2021 indicated that nearly 53% were granted exemptions from Title 42, with the majority ultimately being released into the United States. So I understand what you're saying about recidivism, that some of these are people who have been stopped more than once, and that's why the numbers are higher. But if it's because of Title 42, then it would have been much more true under the previous administration than this administration, because we've gone from, if these numbers are right, 91% were processed under Title 42 and expelled in 90 minutes, and 53% now are being granted exemptions, at least as of August. So, you know, Title 42 may be short-lived for reasons that are beyond our control in the judicial branch. I understand that. But then we need an alternative. We've got to figure out a way to discourage people from coming to our country by letting them know the border is not open. You can't just come and say that you claim asylum and be able to come in the United States indefinitely. You have to be able to prove that. And as you know, Mr. Secretary, it's something you and I have talked about a lot, and I think until we do that and get to that point, those Haitians who were told, hey, we're applying Title 8, which means you can come into the country rather than 42, are going to keep coming. And others will keep coming. And it's not in anybody's interest. And by the way, this notion that this can all be solved by investing in Latin America, particularly in the Northern Triangle countries, that's our response, and the administration typically is we're going to invest in the Northern Triangle countries. I'm not against that. We've done a lot of it, $3.6 billion over the last 5 years, so another $4 billion, we'll see. That's not the ultimate answer, I don't think. But these are all people who came in from outside of Mexico and outside of the Northern Triangle. So are we also going to have a program to stop the push factor in these other countries, including some countries outside of Latin America? Anyway, my time has expired. I apologize for going over time, but as you know, Mr. Secretary, I have a passion about this. I want to get it right. So we have an orderly, lawful process, so the most generous country in the world in terms of immigration can continue to be so, and our citizens can support it, but based on a system that actually works for Latin America, for us, and for the rest of the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, our thanks to Secretary Mayorkas, to Director Ray, to Director Abazade for joining us today, for your testimony, and really for your leadership. You've taken on really tough jobs, and I've had a few tough jobs in my life, and they don't begin to compare to what you're doing. And I thank you for taking on all these responsibilities, working with us and others. I have a question for the Secretary Mayorkas and Director Ray initially. And the question is, Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you discuss how China represents a threat to U.S. economic competitiveness. Senator Portman and I spent a fair amount of time as the leads on the Senate subcommittee on investigations, and we agree with that fully. In past years, Director Ray has stated that the Bureau views China as one of the greatest threats to our nation due to their counterintelligence and economic espionage interests as it relates to targeting economic assets and seeking information related to our intellectual property. As we pivot to our national security posture to address near-peer adversaries as opposed to traditional threats and actors, could each of you, Mr. Secretary and Director Ray, could each of you speak to how your agencies are working together and separately to combat the threat that China poses to our national interests and overall security? Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Senator Carper. Let me identify three different lines of effort that we are executing in response to the threat to our economic and therefore national security that China poses. Number one, of course, we have the infringements on and theft of intellectual property, and we're working very closely in response to that with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Secondly, in the service of human rights on the one hand, and a fair marketplace, a competitive marketplace on the other, we are stopping the importation of goods that are produced in whole or in part through forced labor. Third, we are addressing pure criminal activity, the theft of property by organizations emanating from the PRC. We are also, of course, addressing the cybersecurity threat that has emanated there and has attacked some of our federal agencies.
Okay, thanks. You can hold it right there, if you will. And let me yield to Director Ray. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. As you know, this is something I feel, to use Senator Portman's term, very passionately about. And I think there is no country that presents a greater threat to our innovation, our economic security, and our democratic ideas than the People's Republic of China, which is why we have over 2,000 active investigations tied back to the PRC government across all 56 field offices. That's an almost 1,300% increase in economic espionage investigations tied to China from about a decade ago. As I said in my opening, we're opening a new investigation that's tied back to China about every 12 hours. And it covers pretty much every sector of the economy and every state in the nation. One of the things that we stood up now 18 months or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, was a counterintelligence task force structure modeled after the Joint Terrorism Task Force model that works so well on the terrorism front. So we have a national counterintelligence task force here in the D.C. area, and then we have counterintelligence task forces in every field office, and those in turn bring on partners from other federal agencies, in some cases even state and local agencies, and so that's a big part of our effort. The other thing I would say is it's not just investigations. The reality is we are not going to be able to investigate our way out of this threat. And so a big part of our field offices work together with our partners. I've talked a lot, for example, with Secretary Mayorkas about critical infrastructure and that piece of it, is trying to get out to the private sector, out to the academic sector, and try to help them understand the threat better so that they better harden themselves against the threat. So those are some of the things that I've mentioned.
That's good. That's good. That's encouraging. Mr. Secretary, as you mentioned in your testimony, the Department of Homeland Security Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, also known as CP3, aims to expand the department's ability to prevent terrorism and targeted violence through the development of local prevention frameworks. The CP3 office has been rebranded multiple times, as you know, in the past. In fact, it used to be called the Office for Community Partnerships. In previous Congresses, I've introduced legislation, bipartisan legislation actually, to codify this office in order for there to be consistent leadership and resources for it. Is a CP3 or a similar office to counter the rise of domestic terrorism something that Congress should work now to codify? And what benefits would that provide to the department and to efforts to combat domestic terrorism, given it is one of the top threats facing our homeland? Go right ahead.
Senator, I'm very grateful for your support of the office and for the department as a whole. This office is centered on empowering and equipping neighborhoods, communities across the country to address the threat of domestic violent extremism, homegrown violent extremism from the ground up. We dedicated for the first time a minimum of $77 million in FEMA grant funds dedicated to this growing threat. I very much look forward to working with you to see how legislation can best strengthen that office. We think it's a critical component of our Homeland Security enterprise. Thank you for that encouraging response. A question, if I can, for Director Abazade, if I will. Is there a question that you've not been asked? Is there a question you've not been asked as you prepared for this hearing that you wish you'd been asked? And if for the next minute, just tell us what that question is and give us an answer. Thank you.
Well, generally, I've been advised that the fewer questions, the better. I would say that, in general, the global terrorism landscape remains a top priority for us as a government and for the National Counterterrorism Center, which was purpose-built to, in the wake of 9/11, connect the dots related to the terrorist threat overseas, related to how it may present itself in the domestic context. And we've worked very hard over the last 14 years of our existence to make sure that we're fulfilling that role appropriately. I've been really proud coming on board at the National Counterterrorism Center to see not just the work of NCTC, but to see the work that we're doing across the intelligence community and across the CT community to stay vigilant against the threat, however it may evolve. And we have to be very serious in understanding that it will, in fact, evolve again, and vigilance is required.
Great. Well, thank you for that question and for the answer. To all of you today, thank you for your leadership. It's great to see you, and we're grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Director Wray, have you read the Michael Sussman indictment?
I've had a chance to glance at it, but I haven't had time yet to read through it.
I would suggest you and everybody else read that because it really does lay out exactly what happened to create this political turmoil for 2 or 3, 4 years, really during the Trump administration. It lays out how the Hillary Clinton campaign paid for, through Michael Sussman, completely false allegations that Trump was cooperating with Alpha Bank, planted that story, had an audience with James Baker at the FBI so that the FBI would open up an investigation so that they could report that news. Same exact dynamic in terms of the false steel dossier that also contained Russian disinformation, which the FBI knew about certainly is no later than January 2017. You worked at the Justice Department, as did Michael Sussman. Did you know Michael Sussman?
To my knowledge, I've never met the man.
But did you know him by reputation?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. What do you think James Baker knew Michael Sussman?
I really can't speak to whom James Baker knew.
Do you think it's credible that James Bacon, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, these individuals had no idea who Michael Sussman was and who his clients might be?
Senator, I certainly understand why you're asking the question, but
Good.
given that, but if I could just finish, given that this is an ongoing criminal case being brought by the special counsel with whom we are actively cooperating, I want to make sure
That's fine. I won't get an answer, but let me just make the final point here. So either the FBI was completely clueless or corrupt, but they didn't check into whether Michael Sussman might have been working for the Hillary Clinton campaign before they opened up the investigation to leak to the press, which put this nation through 3-4 years of political turmoil. There needs to be a political accountability, and I hope John Durham has a whole lot more that he's going to be revealing, because I got virtually nothing out of you based on subpoenas. It was interesting listening to your exchange with Senator Paul. You said it was unacceptable what happened. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. But you were confirmed in August of 2017. In February 2018, the Senate Intel Committee was briefed by Bill Priestap, and the bottom line of that is Bill Priestap of the FBI continued to say the Steele dossier was credible, even though the FBI knew in January 2017 that it contained Russian disinformation. Now, that was under your watch. Do you have an explanation on that?
Senator, as I said, we've been working very closely with Special Counsel Durham, and I want to be careful not to start talking about things that may be with.
Okay, that's fine. So another non-response. In February 2020, senior Democrats produced a false intelligence product, had it classified, leaked it to the press, accusing Senator Grassley and I of soliciting Russian disinformation, disseminating it. Completely false. But I can't tell you how many news stories were written about that. Fast forward to August of 2020. By the way, I held a hearing on Russian disinformation as part of my Foreign Relations Committee responsibilities in 2015. I'm well aware of the problem of Russian disinformation. So I didn't need a briefing that the FBI requested to give me. So I didn't ask for this briefing in August 2020. When I went to the briefing, there was absolutely no relevant information. It was a completely BS hearing, and I asked the briefers, who directed you to give me that briefing? And all they could say, it's interagency. Well, there are people in the interagencies. I wrote a letter immediately asking, first of all, what was the backup material for the briefing? I asked who directed it. I knew it was a setup. I knew it would be used just like the false intel product was used previously. So I wasn't happy. And of course, then lo and behold, in late April, early May, it was leaked. That briefing was leaked to the Washington Post, again, accusing me of, disseminating Russian disinformation. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's false. So I got a number of questions which remain unanswered. I sent you a similar letter. What backed up the August briefing? Who directed that briefing? To this day, I have gotten no response. Now, how is it so difficult to respond? And by the way, Senator Grassley, former President pro tem of the Senate, former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is asking the same questions. Why is it that we can't meet with you? Why is it that you will not provide us that basic information of who directed a briefing to 2 U.S. senators that was then leaked for political purposes, used against us, false? Why won't you answer that very basic question?
So, Senator, I want to be a little bit careful of what I can say.
Oh, I can imagine you want to be careful, yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
I want to be a little bit careful about what I can say in this kind of setting about getting into specifics. I understand this is an important topic to you. Before we deliver a defensive briefing like the one that you're describing here, we follow a standard defined process that involves interagency discussion, deliberative process to figure out whether a defensive briefing is even warranted. Just to take a step back, though, because it's important, the entire purpose of defensive briefings to an individual is
Mr. Gray, listen, you're just describing a process, and I understand the process, great. The process obviously broke down. There are all kinds of processes putting in safeguards in the FISA court that were obviously violated in that corrupt investigation. So again, I'm just asking a simple question, why won't you tell me in detail who was engaged in that process? But I'm not going to get, so I'm asking you to provide that answer. I'm asking you to give me a briefing, meet with me and Senator Grassley. We deserve to know the answers. Quite honestly, the American people deserve to know the answers. Secretary Mayorkas, real quick in my 30 seconds left, you said you've gotten some numbers on the border. Are you willing to finally share them? Like, for example, like out of the 1.3 million people that have been apprehended, again, I get the complications. There have been multiple arrests, the same individual, fine. So the relevant piece of information would be how many people have you dispersed in America out of those 1.3 million people? How many people have been released into the interior either with a notice to appear or even worse, a notice to report? And again, you have to live in a fantasy world to think that they're going to report. But go ahead. How many people have been released?
Senator, I apologize. I do not have that data. I was reciting the data of encounters, apprehensions, use of Title 42, and use of Title 8 expedited removal. I will provide the data you have requested. I do not have it at my disposal.
Okay, I'll be expecting that information very soon. Okay, thank you.
Senator Johnson. Senator Langford, you're recognized for your question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, of course, you have tens of thousands of people right now that are coming at the border. You have tens of thousands of people that are underneath bridges, as we've seen under several of the international bridges at this point, and in the process of actually moving some of those folks out of the country. What is the process for actually relocating individuals under Title 42 authority out of that area under those bridges? You've started that process with the Haitians, but walk me through quickly in the process because I have multiple other questions.
Yes, what we do is we look at where our capacity is at other processing centers, and this goes to an apparent miscommunication I've had with Ranking Member Portman, for which I apologize. What we do is we look at processing capacity. We then move the individuals from Del Rio as needed to ensure safety and security. We move them to the other processing centers so that they may be repatriated to Haiti or other countries from those various processing centers. We are increasing the frequency and number of the repatriation flights each day.
Okay. You expect to be able to move all of those individuals out in the next how many days?
Our goal is to do so within the next 10 days or 9 days. We expect to see dramatic results in the next 48 to 96 hours, and we'll have a far better sense in the next 2 days.
And what do you anticipate is coming at you as far as additional numbers? Because obviously this number grew exceptionally quickly of Haitians and of others from all over the world coming.
So we are watching that, Senator Langford, very, very carefully. I do want to note that some individuals turned back yesterday by reason of our measures, which I have described in this hearing, and we're hoping that what we are doing now serves a deterrent because it backs up the words that we have spoken since the very outset, that irregular migration is not the way to enter the United States. It will not work. It is dangerous, and it creates a humanitarian challenge.
It does, and that was actually the ongoing statement of the Trump administration over and over again to say that why they put the MPP in process to discourage people from coming, doing the exact same thing that you were doing, trying to be able to get them back to their home country, apply from there. There is this false belief that I hear from some that if you're going to apply for asylum, it seems to be America is the only place in the world to apply for asylum for. So we have people from all over the world that are making their ways, paying cartels to be able to come through Mexico, to be able to come to the United States, and people have this perception that, okay, well, they're coming here because of economic reasons, of asylum, of disaster, whatever it may be. But that's not the true definition of asylum. Asylum is you go to the next safe place that you can go, not travel through 14 different countries to be able to get to a spot you want to go to. There is a way to do regular immigration where we have 1 million people a year that be able to go through that process. And that's what we would encourage individuals to do. Mr. Ray, let me ping a question to you that you and I have not spoken about before, but it's exceptionally important to me. There's been a tremendous number of individuals that are dealing drugs that have a dramatic effect on my state as they do on your home state. Much of that is coming across our southwest border. We're very aware of that. But some of that is actually being run by criminal operations inside our prisons. One of the pushes that I've had for a while has been the issue of cell phones inside of prisons. Because we see it in both state prisons and in federal prisons where we have drug cartels being literally run out of the prison still. It's one thing for a victim of crime to be able to end up and to be exposed to crime. It's another thing to realize the person that perpetrated that is still operating their gang. What can we do to actually facilitate getting cell phones out of prisons, and what kind of cooperation do we need with other agencies to clear that?
I think we have reasonably good work on that being done with federal prisons in the VOP, for example. But as you say, with state prisons, you know, it's a more of a range depending on their resources. If it's all right, I'd like to sort of take a little bit of time to think about that.
Let's do.
And maybe get back to you, and so
let's keep going with that conversation. I've had this conversation with FCC and with some other folks. There's some regulatory issues that need to be done. There's some cooperation that needs to be there with multiple agencies. And I'd love to be able to maintain that conversation because this is a big issue. When you're a victim of a rape and your rapist actually contacts you by cell phone from their prison, that's got to be resolved. And if you're victims of drug crimes and you're still dealing with that in the days ahead. On the cell phone issue, and this is a different cell phone issue on this, Secretary Mayorkas, I understand that you've moved over the tracking of individuals crossing our border from an ankle monitor and are experimenting with giving individuals a cell phone. And they have to be able to check in on that cell phone once or twice a day. That the notice to report plus apparently is the term is being used. I'm not familiar with this process and trying to be able to figure out what is being done with that cell phone and what's happening if individuals don't check in, if they're given a cell phone paid for by the American public to be able to track them. Is there a tracking device all the time where we're able to track their location constantly? If they don't check in, are we going to be able to pick those up?
Senator, if they do not check in, we make a determination based on the facts whether or not they need to be the subject of priority enforcement action for evading law enforcement and not honoring their obligations as a condition of their release on alternatives to detention. One of the things that we are looking at is assessing the efficacy of the phones and determining whether, in fact, they are a valuable enforcement tool. And we're collecting data on that, and I would look forward to providing it to you.
How many people are in that process right now? Do you know what the size of that pilot is?
I do not, Senator. We'll get that to you.
But these are all recent crossers that are getting this, correct?
Yes, they are.
So I would assume they would all follow under that priority of if they're a recent crosser and they're not checking in, then they would fall underneath that priority of we need to go scoop them up and find out why they're not checking in.
Individuals who do not fulfill their responsibilities to appear and report are considered a border security enforcement priority.
Okay, and that goes back to one of my questions before about just trying to get a good ballpark figure of how many people that fit into that priority group are actually having enforcement on them currently. I understand there's a new process on prosecutorial discretion that's being used by some of the attorneys to actually go before the court. Once folks have actually been obtained and going before the court, then attorneys for DHS and ICE are coming and saying, allow us prosecutorial discretion to be able to release this individual. Is that a new process or is that something that's ongoing?
A prosecutorial discretion is something that has been...
That's around for a long time. I'm just talking about actually going to the court and requesting it.
I believe that has been longstanding.
Okay. We'll follow up and get additional details on this because it's my understanding there's been, I received some recent information about 6,234 cases that have been dismissed and then the process of those cases, once they're actually in the process, and some of them included some folks with a criminal record as well. And we're just trying to get additional information.
I look forward to providing that to you. I know that the Office of Legal Counsel within Immigration and Customs Enforcement has promulgated new guidelines for its attorneys. And if you don't have those guidelines, we'd be pleased to share them with you.
That'd be helpful. This goes back to the ICE guidelines before on detention, that we're trying to get clarity on it, that we had talked about that needed by August. You had said I would have it by August, don't have it. What are we doing on enforcement inside of the country? What are we doing on prosecutorial enforcement? This goes back to the deterrence issues. If individuals are able to get into the country and they don't have any consequences on them, they'll continue to be able to come, whether they come across the border with a child so they can work their way through, or whether they'll find other avenues to be able to get in. If there's not enforcement, it'll continue to accelerate. So,
thank you. Thank you,
Chairman,
Senator. Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. Appreciate the second round. Appreciate our witnesses staying around. It's really important. And I actually want to build on Chairman Peters, some of his earlier questioning on our digital spaces, our online. And we know that digital spaces are just fueling the rise in domestic terrorism. You know, extremists, they try to exploit the internet to recruit, to franchise, and of course, unfortunately, to plot attacks. So Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray, to both of you, how can Congress better empower federal law enforcement officials to combat online hate before it escalates into any real world violence? How do you work with the digital platforms, and what kind of support can we provide you with, whether it's through this committee or other committees of jurisdiction, to help you do this job? Secretary Mayorkas, you can go first.
I'd like to thank you very much, Senator Rosen. You know, I've heard Director Wray speak very compellingly about two forces on the domestic landscape that are really converging to create the increase that we have observed over the last few years. Number one is the fact that we're speaking very often of lone actors or loosely affiliated groups of individuals, not the traditional organized structures, number one. And number two, as he referenced earlier in this hearing, the fact that social media as a terrain that can so easily propagate misinformation, false information, and allow communications to occur among loosely affiliated individuals. I'd like to give some thought to and speak with our partners, Director Wray, Director Abazade, with respect to what legislation might be useful in this space. But we are working together in an all-of-government effort to increase, to address this increased threat.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I want to give you the tools you really need to protect us, and that's terrific. Director Wray, do you have some additional information you'd like to add about how you think we might help you in this space?
Well, without weighing in on a specific legislative proposal, what I would say, and I've spoken about this many times, I can't overstate the impact of default encryption and the role it's playing, including in terrorism. And what I mean by that is more and more the information that's going to allow us to, as I said to, I think, Chairman Peters earlier in an exchange, separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of social media, is being able to, with lawful process, that is appropriate court warrants, get access to those communications where the most meaningful discussion of the violence is occurring. And more technology is moving in a direction where no matter how bulletproof the affidavit in support of the warrant, no matter how ironclad the independent judicial approval, and no matter how horrific the criminal activity that's being investigated, we will be blind to it. And I think that is something that is worthy of Congress's attention.
Well, thank you. I look forward to having some more conversations with you offline about that. I want to move over and talk about a little bit about the nonprofit security grants. I know we've talked about these before, and of course the alarming rise in anti-Semitism. Again, we're talking about our domestic violent extremists here. And despite the alarming rise, the nonprofit security grants, they fulfill less than half of the applications it received for grants this year. far outstripping the $180 million that Congress provided through regular appropriations for fiscal year 2021. So, Mr. Secretary, given the growing need for the nonprofit security grant program, again, we talked earlier about the communities understanding how to best protect themselves from any attacks or make themselves any vulnerabilities that they have. How does DHS, we haven't given you enough resources. How can you fill this gap, and what else do you need for us to do?
Thank you very much, Senator. I am engaged with the faith-based community on this very issue. We are extensively so, and I am taking a look at our grant programs writ large across the board, not only the nonprofit security grants, but the Urban Area Security Initiative grant program, some of its components and the like, to see how those dollars can meet the threats to ensure that any gaps are closed. I'd like to circle back with you on what we find and what other support we need. I'm very appreciative.
No, and I want to really circle back on the UASI and talking about those formulas, as I spoke about earlier with critical infrastructure. We have to think about how our UASI grants are funded, as well as the nonprofit security grants, because we have critical infrastructure in many places, and we want to be sure that those formulas reflect the broad spectrum of threats that we may see now, especially on the cyber front and other ways. So I really appreciate, again, all of you being here. I look forward to having some more conversations and putting forth some meaningful legislation out of this committee as well as others. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Rosen. Before Ranking Member Portman and I make some brief closing remarks, Secretary Mayorkas, I think I'd like to ask you about some very concerning images that were released yesterday that appeared to show Border Patrol agents whipping Haitian migrants. These acts certainly are intolerable and a complete diversion from your agency's mission. And my question to you is, can you explain to the committee what you will be doing to address what Americans saw when looking at those images?
I'm very pleased you asked that question. It has been uppermost in my mind since I first saw the images late yesterday, Mr. Chairman. We commenced an investigation at my direction immediately. The Office of Professional Responsibility within the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Customs and Border Protection, number one. Number two, we alerted the Inspector General of the incidents. Number three, I directed that the Office of Professional Responsibility be present on site in Del Rio 24/7 to ensure that the conduct of our personnel adheres to our policy, to our policies, to our training, and to our values. I was horrified to see the images, and we look forward to learning the facts that are adduced from the investigation, and we will take actions that those facts compel. We do not tolerate any mistreatment or abuse of a migrant, period. I also want to say, and I think it's very important to say, that I saw two other powerful things yesterday when I was there under the bridge in Del Rio. Number one, I saw the acute vulnerability of the Haitian population, the predominantly Haitian population, and I cannot overstate how difficult that is to see. We are speaking about vulnerable individuals in tragic circumstances. I also saw the extraordinary work of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, not only the United States Border Patrol, but its Office of Field Operations, as well as other agencies within the Department of Homeland Security that have been surged to Del Rio to address the situation in partnership with state and local law enforcement personnel, as well as the forces in civil society. We saw the American Red Cross. We saw World Central Kitchen providing food and supplies to these individuals. It's an all of government and all of local society effort there. And I want to say that the actions that we saw, the images that we saw, do not speak of the incredible men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection or of the Department of Homeland Security as an institution.
Thank you for those comments. Ranking Member Portman, you have some closing remarks?
Thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate all the time today. This was a long session, and as predicted at the start, there were going to be some challenging questions, and that's because we are facing so many threats. And at least on my behalf, I will say that I think we need some policy changes to be able, again, to let the men and women who are working for you, who are so committed to their task, to do their job more effectively. We talked about the foreign terrorist threat. We talked about Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we talked about the way we withdrew, having enhanced that threat, at least in my view, and the need for us to have better eyes and ears on the region. As we saw with the drone attack, we are in a challenging situation now. We talked about cyber threats. We talked about the ransomware issue, the need for reporting legislation, which I hope we can get done soon on a bipartisan basis. We talked about border security, illegal immigration, illegal drugs coming in, the fentanyl particularly. We talked about the fact that what we've been doing hasn't worked. And particularly with this just dramatic humanitarian crisis with the Haitians coming, I mean, what we're doing is not working. And again, it's not just that the smugglers are providing disinformation to these poor families, not just in Latin America now, but around the world. It's the fact that they're providing accurate information that if you come to the border, particularly with a child, you can come in. And that's unfortunately the result of a policy that we have put in place that makes it a draw. So unless you're a single man coming to the border, you probably are being told the right thing, which is, you know, the United States is a place where people want to come and live and work, and we should be doing it in a legal and orderly way. So, Mr. Secretary, I know you and I have a lot more to talk about in that area, but I would hope that today, you know, with everything going on, you talked about just surging Border Patrol to Del Rio to help. Where'd they come from? Well, they came from shutting down checkpoints all over the Southwest. I mean, is that smart? You talked about the fact that, you know, there's so much focus there. We shut down the bridge there in Del Rio. Commercial traffic ended. The economic impact on that community. So this is obviously what we're doing is not working. On domestic terrorism, we talked about the huge challenge of social media, the need for us to enhance the nonprofit security grant program and other ways to deal with the very real threat of domestic terrorism. Secretary Wray talked about how it's grown. And then on the Afghan evacuees, we just have a difference of opinion about the facts, and we just need to know what the facts are. And we need to be sure that we're doing our, what I believe is our moral responsibility of taking care of people who helped us, particularly given the way in which we left, which left a lot of people in a very vulnerable situation, but also be sure we know who they are and be sure that we're not putting ourselves in a position where, as Dr. Abazade said early in her testimony, foreign terrorists are looking for ways to get people into our country. That's something we, of course, all want to avoid and not take risks on. So we look forward to our classified briefing on that if that's what's necessary to get the information. If it doesn't have to be classified, that's fine for us, too. We just want to get the information to be able to ensure that we're doing our proper oversight. And again, thank you all for being here today, and thanks for the people you represent here today for what they do every day to help keep our country safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Director Wray, I just want to go back to the first line of questioning and the question that I asked you. And I certainly understand and respect that CASEA is an ongoing investigation, but the FBI's actions here may have cost millions of dollars and possibly even more than that. The FBI, in my mind, is going to need to explain this action. We need to know who signed off on it, who was aware, and whether the cost to the bottom line of American families and businesses was considered in that decision process. We also need to know what operational benefits the FBI believed it would gain by withholding this information, and if you were actually successful. These are just some of the questions that come to mind immediately, and you know, this is just had to come immediately because we got this information not from the FBI, but we received this information by reading the Washington Post. We would hope that we would get information of this critical nature in a direct manner, not through reading it in a secondary source. And perhaps most importantly, we need to know if the FBI has done this before and if it's occurring in other cases. And I would expect a classified briefing that is substantive, not just canned responses. And Director Wray, you know this committee is also working on cybersecurity legislation, and I certainly plan to to work and make sure the FBI is transparent so that we can effectively carry out our legislative and oversight duties. And certainly I appreciate your commitment today in committee to briefing the committee, and I look forward to getting that scheduled as soon as practical. In closing, to join Senator Portman and all my colleagues in thanking the witnesses for being here today. I certainly, and we all recognize that you have extremely busy schedules, and we're grateful that you took the time to be here and to answer some tough questions on the tough problems that we're facing as a country. The committee is working to address many of the issues that were discussed today. I look forward to continuing our conversation about cyber attacks and what tools and information the federal government needs to better prevent breaches and attacks at our hearing coming up in a couple days on Thursday. Senator Portman and I have been working on legislation related to reporting cybersecurity breaches and ransomware payments, and I look forward to introducing and moving that legislation very soon. The committee will be continuing our oversight of security and border security personnel practices at both the northern and the southern borders. And in the coming days, the committee will receive a classified member briefing on the multi-agency efforts to screen and resettle Afghan refugees. While we have spent several productive hours during this hearing examining our nation's greatest security threats, there's still much more work to do for this committee to continue conducting the oversight that we are required to do and ensuring that our national security agencies are effectively focused on all of their critical missions. I look forward to continuing to work productively with my colleagues on the committee to ensure that we're doing everything, absolutely everything in our power to safeguard American communities. With that, the record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on October 6,